on meeting materials. That should open up for you. Then go ahead and join the session if you are remote. We ask that all remote participants keep their mics muted when you're not speaking to avoid any audio interference. But it is an interactive meeting. As always, we want to hear from everybody. So if you're remote, if you want to speak up during the Q&A, please feel free to do so. If you are here in Boston, please approach the microphone we've got in the center right there and ask your questions or comments after each presentation. If you're watching online, please use the chat box in the Q&A section, and AOAC staff, Nora Marshall over here, will be monitoring that chat box, and she'll read the questions out loud to the presenters. One final thing. We're scheduled to have a break at 3 p.m. It would be a 15-minute break. That time could change a little bit depending on how fast the presentations go, but scheduled for a break at 3 p.m. and the meeting will go from 1 p.m. until 5. With that, I'm happy to introduce our Executive Director, David Schmidt, sorry.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome to Boston, everyone. If you're just arriving today, I know some have been here since Thursday, and we've really had a great discussion at the Analytical Solutions Forum, and I think you're going to get a great overview of the progress that CASP has made. You know, it's interesting, I'm in my 3rd year as Executive Director, and when I came in addition to getting orientation on a lot of areas of the organization, I was presented with this new analytical issue that the staff were wondering whether we were going to take on. And so, you know, it was an interesting question at that time whether this organization had been around since 1884, is ready to take on a topic like cannabis. But boy, it didn't take long to look into it and realize the help that we could give to progress on this analytical issue. And I'm really pleased with what the CASP group has done just in a little bit less than 3 years at this point since its formation. So we've really covered a lot of ground. It's a hardworking program for us, really thanks to our chairs who have volunteered and provided great leadership. The staff has provided great leadership, and so we just really appreciate all of you being here today and all of you that are attending virtually. Want to give a special welcome to our CASP advisory members who really make our programs possible. And to continue the kind of great momentum we've made so far, we'll need that continued support, and we'd sure like even more of you who maybe are on the fence or haven't been able to be a supporter yet will join this group as well, and that way you can help determine the direction of our agenda. And as you all know, in this area, there's so much more to cover. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Chris and wish you a great meeting and look forward to talking with you during the meeting. Thanks so much.
Thank you, David. All right, so I'm going to give you guys an overview presentation, but before I do that, I do just want to show you all the agenda. And one AV question, Nick. Are you recording or should I? Okay, cool. All right, so today's agenda, it's up on the screen now. We've already had our welcome from Dave Schmidt. Next, I'll be doing a program review. After that, we'll be playing a recording of Deborah McKenzie, our Director of Standards Development. She'll be going over the SMPR process for you guys again. She is in the building, but she's like triple booked, so a video will suffice for today. Then we've got Scott Coates from the AOAC Research Institute. He's going to give a presentation about PTM, OMA, ERV, and the TME programs. After that, we've got our working group chairs who are going to present. Julie Kowalski is with us virtually, and Holly Johnson is here. There she is. And Holly, you're welcome to join us up here if you'd like. And they'll be talking about our newest working group, the product-centric working group. After that, we will have a presentation from Brent Wilson from NIST. He's the chair of the proficiency testing working group. Then we will have Julia Bramante over here giving us an update on the activities of the micro working group, and she'll touch on the micro ERP as well. We've got a recording of Toby, who was unable to join us today. He will be, I have a laser here, don't I? Yeah. Toby will be giving us an update on the activities of the training and education working group over the last 8 months or so. Then we've got our special guest speaker, Katie Muller from the National Safety Council. She'll be presenting towards the end. Finally, and this is kind of exciting, at the very end, we've got an open discussion on the advisory panel priorities. So we've got a few advisory panel members with us today, a few virtually. That's going to be just an open discussion that they will lead. And actually, sorry, I didn't even mention our science advisor, Susan Iadino, will lead that discussion along with Scott Coates. And what we want out of that is really just to get some great ideas out of you guys, out of the community for where you'd like to see CASP go. Then the advisory panel can take that into consideration and vote on the ideas at their next meeting. So I'm pretty excited to see where that goes. With that, I will pop up my presentation and talk to you guys about the program. So I don't know if all of you have been sitting in on the ASF meetings or not, but term that's been getting thrown around a lot lately is that integrated program term, and CASP is one of those integrated programs. And what we mean by that is, well, to me at least, it means that this program has a more broad reach than some of our previous stakeholder panels did in the past. Instead of being one panel with a bunch of working groups that just turn out SMPR after SMPR, it's actually a comprehensive integrated program. It touches many parts of AOAC infrastructure and really harnesses the full power of the association. Of course, we've got standards in OMA. That's what I've always done, and that's what I'm still doing with Holly, Julie, and Julia's groups. But beyond that, we of course have training and education, which Toby is heading up that working group, Toby Astle, and he works closely with our communications team at AOAC. Also, our marketing and comms team, they're pretty heavily involved in the program as well. PT, this is a big part of it. Of course, we have the proficiency testing working group led by Brent Wilson. And now this is probably my best example of how it's an integrated program. And that means that that part of the program, it's being managed by the proficiency testing department. In the past, these stakeholder panels and whatnot, me or one of my colleagues would usually handle all the working groups. But proficiency testing is obviously quite different from developing a standard for total yeast and mold, for example. So that's being managed entirely independently by Shane Flynn of our PT department in conjunction with Brent from NIST. And then I'm not going to talk much about this because Scott has a whole presentation about it, but another good example of why it's an integrated program at AOAC. We are also working very closely with the Research Institute. So this is kind of my structure chart of what CASP looked like last year. We've got the community. And that's you guys. That's everybody who's on my CASP mailing list, everybody who's in the working groups. Anyone with an interest at all really is part of the community. Out of the community comes the advisory panel, who, as Dave said, make everything possible. They provide the guidance to the working groups as to what they would like to see the program accomplish. And then stemming from that are our working groups, PT, training and ed, micro, and then we've had a little change. Let me go back actually. We had the cannabinoids working group, chaired by Holly Johnson, and we had the chemical contaminants working group, chaired by Julie Kowalski. And those have actually now been combined because the AP has asked us to now focus on products rather than analytes. So for example, right now they have asked us to start with cannabinoid infused beverages. So that's exactly what the product-centric working group is working on now. It was a merger of the two original working groups. So we have Holly and Julie co-chairing that group. And then keeping things running all the while, AOAC staff and our wonderful science advisor, Susan Iadino, we meet weekly to address all project risks, issues, action items, just to touch base and make sure everything is running smoothly. So I'm going to go into all of these in a little bit more detail now. As I said, the CASP community is you, whether you're on the AP, a working group, an ERP, or if you just receive the mailing list, you are the community. Mailing list gets you on the newsletter, which is typically sent once a month. It includes things like working group updates, calls for methods, upcoming CASP meetings, upcoming related events, and so on. So the groups are quite big, so we are encouraging people to sign up only if you are able to actively attend the meetings and actively contribute. If you really just want to stay in the loop, you can go to the form I've got linked at the bottom and select mailing list only. Then you won't miss a thing. You'll get all of the updates and you will know exactly what's going on with CASP. That said, I don't want to discourage anyone from joining the working groups either. If it is something you want to participate in, you feel like you have something to contribute, please go ahead, sign up for one of the working groups via that same link. So the advisory panel, as I mentioned, they determine the priorities of the program. Members of the AP, they join at an organizational level. And they meet pretty much quarterly to review program progress and when needed to discuss priorities. Alicia Michaeljohn, she couldn't be with us today, but she's our Director of Business Development. She manages the AP. If you have any questions about the AP or would actually like to become part of the AP, you can always talk to Alicia. She's happy to help. There are different levels of membership: Pioneer, Partner, and Affiliate, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in the next slide. Before I go there, I just did want to add one more thank you to the AP. These are the current AP members. So as Dave said, if you want to be part of this, you want your logo up here next time. And most importantly, really most importantly, is we want to know where the community needs this program to go. We want the program's for you guys. We want to know what you guys want to see CASP accomplish, and that's best done at the advisory panel level. So there were 3 members of membership, but we've recently added a 4th. And that's because we've had some interest from state labs wanting to get involved, but usually they're kind of strapped for funding. So we all got together as a team and worked out a new government tier to try to allow state labs and any other government entity really to get involved with the AP. They're the ones setting the regulations, so we would like them to be there as much as possible. Moving on to the working groups. As I mentioned, the product-centric working group, that's a brand new group. And I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on the working groups because our working group chairs have all really excellent, thorough presentations on them. So just a few bullets on each. Product-centric working group, as I mentioned, it was a merger of the chemical contaminants working group and the cannabinoids working group. Co-chairs are Holly Johnson from APA and Julie Kowalski from Kowalski Science Solutions. That group focuses on cannabinoid content and chemical contamination of finished products, for example, beverages. And according to the AP, we may be moving on to cosmetics next. It's all up for discussion, will be addressed during the panel discussion later. But that's what they're doing. They're not saying like we're going to look at heavy metals. They're saying we're going to look at a product and then address every possible issue within that product. Most of the work from that group is going to lead to SMPRs, the traditional standards development work. Those are, of course, I'm talking about SMPRs like you all know. I think most of you do, but what they are standards that methods that are submitted eventually need to meet to become official methods of analysis. They're not methods, they are standards that the methods need to meet. This working group could also end up developing guidelines, other standard documents, whatever the advisory panel and the community needs. The micro working group is chaired by Julia Bramante, who's sitting at the table, from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Their most recent SMPR, total yeast and mold, was recently approved by pretty much a unanimous vote. I think there were a couple abstentions, but it was overwhelmingly approved. And it's going through our publication process right now. That's soon going to be available in the OMA online. And SMPRs are free to access for everyone. They're currently working on a new project with the guidance from the advisory panel. They're working on guidelines for cannabis microbiology. The intent is for those guidelines to become a new appendix for the AOAC OMA. And like with product-centric, most of this group's work will lead to SMPRs, the standards that the methods will need to meet to become OMAs, but they might do other things once in a while, like the guidelines they're working on right now. So I love this slide. It's a pretty cool list of all the SMPRs that CASP has developed so far. CASP has only been around a couple years, but as you can see, our volunteers have done a ton of work. So again, thank you to all of you who sit on the working groups and especially our chairs. How many are up here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 or 13 SMPRs up there. These are all either already published in the OMA or going through the publication process right now. I mentioned total yeast and mold, and also the quantitative mycotoxins SMPR was also recently approved and working its way through publications. Proficiency testing working group. So I mentioned earlier, this is managed by a different department within AOAC. I'm not really that deeply involved. I got some notes from Shane and Brent, and I've put them up here on the slide, but I'm not going to go into detail because I know Brent has a great presentation waiting for us. In a nutshell, though, they are a different type of group. This and the next group I'm about to discuss. They're different from the working groups I'm used to managing. They don't churn out SMPRs. What they do, in this case at least, is they're working on ways to advise AOAC in the development of a proficiency testing program. Much like the training and education working group, They are working on ways to advise AOAC on potential trainings. We have a presentation from Toby, but real quick, they've done quite a lot this year. February, there were several webinars, setting up a cannabis lab, microcontaminants, heavy metals, and pesticides. More recently, there was a session, USDA offered to do an update for Casp on the final rule. And there was also a vape science panel where we had some great speakers from around the world talking about cannabis and vaporizers. Survey feedback showed a really high level of satisfaction with these sessions. Now, one thing I want to note about the Training and Education Working Group is it's massive. It's like 2/3 of the community. I think last I looked, there were about 300 people signed up for it. So it's just not practical for them to meet regularly anymore like the other working groups do. Most of this work is being done offline with Toby and with Dawn from AOAC and with members of that working group who have signed up, working in the background, reaching out to Toby or myself with their ideas, and then we make that happen. So if you signed up for that group and you haven't seen a meeting notice, that's why. That's kind of how we're running it now. And if you do have any great ideas for training, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email. I'll talk to Toby and we'll see what we can do. So ERPs, they're traditionally a bit separated from standards development. It's a separate process at AOAC that we call conformity assessment. And rather than working on specific projects like the standards development working group, are, they play a more traditional role at AOAC and that is of reviewing methods for OMA consideration. So we're actively calling for new methods in several areas right now. These are all open calls for methods, and you can visit our website if you'd like to see what else we've got going on. Once we receive methods for any of these, they go to the ERP chair for discussion, and then we assign reviewers, a primary and secondary, and they do a written review of each method. The ERP eventually gets together at one of our analytical methods week. They have a good discussion on the method, and they vote as to whether or not it does in fact meet the SMPR. It's kind of the end process of the standards development and conformity assessment workflow. Recent meetings, just real quick. In April, the cannabinoids ERP met. That's chaired by Melissa Phillips of NIST. 2 methods were approved then. Those were both for cannabinoids and chocolate. In August, our last analytical methods week, chemical contaminants ERP met. That's chaired by Andrew Pham. 1 method was approved. That was for heavy metals in cannabis. That's going through the publication process right now. And then the microbial contaminants ERP, they approved 2 matrix extensions for existing OMAs that are now also approved for total yeast and mold in cannabis. I'm going to let Scott talk a little bit more about how that all came to be because those were originally through the ERV program. So I'll leave that to Scott in a bit though. This is a list of all the methods we've approved so far. Again, I'm pretty impressed with this. We had a couple for cannabinoids and dried plant materials, oils. We've got a few for chocolate. We now have heavy metals, and we have those matrix extensions. There are a few others in the works. We've got a pesticide method. It's gone back to the author for some changes, but it looks promising. And there are a few other cannabinoid methods that are out there that we're waiting on resubmissions. And then, of course, once we receive methods for any of those other analytes I mentioned a few slides ago, those will be in the works too. So it's looking good. Casp is really starting to make an impact on the OMA. I'm pretty happy about that. Oh, here we go. These are actually all of our open calls for methods. STEC, we haven't received anything yet. Mycotoxin, this is a mycotoxin screening technique. We also have the quantitative mycotoxins SMPR that's going through publications right now, so that will be calling for methods soon. We have detection of salmonella. We've got aspergillus, pesticide residues. That's still up since we don't have an OMA for it yet, even though there is one kind of making its way through. But if you or anyone you know has a pesticides method you think might meet that SMPR, please do let me know. Residual solvents in cannabis, and looks like I got mycotoxins twice. Sorry about that. So just, you all know how important this work is, but just a couple of things I want to add. 2018, of course, the Farm Bill directed USDA to establish a regulatory framework for hemp production. And based on this, they published the final rule back in January, providing regulations for the production of hemp. We're mentioned twice in the final rule. That's mostly to do with measurement uncertainty. Susan, do you have anything to add about that? I know you're usually bringing up measurement uncertainty in our meetings. Okay, we'll leave it at that then. Okay, no, I thought you might, so. Of course, also this is helping inform state regulations for cannabis. We're being mentioned more and more in state regulations, which is really exciting. Besides that, this obviously isn't just a US issue. In fact, 3 of the OMAs I mentioned, 3 of the 7 methods we have approved are actually international. So it really is a global program here. What's next? Well, it is up to the advisory panel, but some things that have been discussed are possibly an adulteration working group or a trade issues working group or some combination of the two. Training and education will continue. Proficiency testing is going to continue. Advising AOAC's PT program, but they've also got some new ideas up their sleeve. So there might be some new work coming to the PT working group soon. And of course, the micro and product-centric working groups, they'll be looking at new analytes, new products, guidelines, standards, and more. So to reiterate, it is an integrated program, encapsulates a lot more than standards development, and it impacts many different parts of the cannabis industry, leverages several different departments within AOAC. And as long as CASP persists, it will continue to address the multiple integrated needs of the cannabis analytical community. Quick membership plug. We do, you join the advisory panel for CASP at an organizational level, but of course we offer individual memberships to everybody as well. The rate is pretty reasonable now, and it gets you some great benefits like discounts to the OMA, discounts to meetings like this, journal. So if you're interested, just have a look at our website and see if that might be something you'd like to do. Of course, program like this can't happen without a lot of people's help and involvement. So special thanks to all of our working group chairs, to our science advisor, Susan, all the volunteers who work so hard to come to our working groups, which sometimes meet weekly. It is quite a lot of work, especially for volunteers, so we do appreciate it. And then the CASP team at AOAC takes a lot of hands to keep this thing moving. So that's, if I forgot anyone at AOAC, I apologize, but I think I've got you all up there. Those are the people who we meet weekly with Susan and the rest of the staff to address the program's immediate needs. And one last thank you to the advisory panel. As I said, this would not be possible without you guys. So if, yeah, one more time, if it's something you guys would like to participate in, if you want to help drive the direction of the program, talk to me or Alicia, and we'll help you out with that. That is it from me. Happy to take any questions anyone might have. Anything online, Nora? All righty. Great. Well, thank you guys very much. Hope that was informative. Next is a recorded presentation from Deborah McKenzie, our Director of Standards Development. So leave that to our AV guys to play.
Hello, my name is Deborah McKenzie. I'm the Senior Director for AOAC Standards and the Official Methods Program. Welcome to this AOAC Standards Overview. AOAC Standards activities begin with the initiation of a project or a program. And AOAC programs or projects began or are initiated with the formation of a new advisory panel or the engagement of an existing advisory panel. AOAC advisory panels advise on the scope of the programs or project working groups. They advise on the potential working group chairs. They advise on the experts and organizations to engage and involve. And they assist AOAC in building a broad stakeholder network. The scope of AOAC working groups result in deliverables. These deliverables can be consensus standards or documents, service integration, publications, training and education, or other deliverables as defined. In AOAC standards development activities, stakeholder participation is essential. All stakeholders are entitled to due process, and all stakeholders can share their perspectives. Anyone with a material interest may participate, and all standards are developed with the lack of dominance by any one interest. We strive to have balanced input. In fact, draft standards must contain input of stakeholders of varying interests. This leads to a more robust consensus document and standard. AOAC will confirm the process and mechanism by which the community or stakeholders demonstrate consensus. AOAC standards and consensus products are developed using basic international principles that include transparency, openness, balance of interest, due process, consensus, and appeals. And these products that result may be performance requirements, guidelines, sampling standards, best practice documents, operational documents, reference material documents, or training documents. This is an example. These are examples of the various types of standards AOAC developed. These include sampling standards for biothreat agents. We're looking at recommendations. We're looking at guidance for soil testing and characterization. But AOAC's most abundant type of standard are its standard method performance requirements, or what we refer to as SMPRs. I'm going to go through a little bit about SMPRs because most of our working groups develop them. And so we do have more of a defined process and procedure and format for our standard method performance requirements. They include an intended use section, an applicability section, which actually mimics and sets the tone for what the applicability statement should be in a method. Various definitions that are used by the community and acceptable with respect to the analyte matrix and methodology under consideration by the standard method performance requirements. However, the heart of the document is the method performance requirements table. This table includes the validation parameters of interest and along with their limits or ranges that are expected acceptance criteria for any methods being validated using the standard. The standard also includes system suitability requirements, reference material information, validation guidance information, and maximum time to result. It also offers the opportunity to be flexible enough to include information that will be needed on any matrices, such as those listed here, or on target analytes. The process by which we developed these standards, I mentioned, began with an advisory panel. After the scope is defined and we've assembled the working group chair and other experts to begin, AOAC launches the working group activity with the presentation by the working group chair or champion. And this is where they take the preset scope per the advisory panel and turn it into a basic applicability statement that really defines the scope of work for the working group and will lay the foundation for them being able to draft the standard. After that happens, and these usually take place during program meetings, after that happens, AOAC will then facilitate the working group meetings, and these are for the most part all virtual. Working group chairs and their working group members do deliberate, they do research, they break into subgroups, some of them may, and to achieve the development of a draft standard, a draft SMPR or draft guidance, whatever that consensus document is. Most of the bulk of this work happens in those working group meetings, both online, but then also offline in many cases, as AOAC has expanded the capability for working groups to be able to work online via SharePoint. Once the working groups have achieved a consensus on a draft document. That document then is posted for a minimum of 30 days. During this 30-day period, stakeholders from any interest or sector may provide comments. In addition, AOAC may hold a virtual public comment session, which will also provide stakeholders the opportunity to provide oral comments. All of those comments are put together, and then the working group chair, along with the working group members, will reconcile those comments, and a second working group draft will then come forward based on their consensus. It is that second working group draft that will then go to the broader community for broader stakeholder consensus. This is the final time in the process where stakeholders have an opportunity to weigh in on the content of the standard. Once the stakeholders have achieved consensus by a mechanism defined by AOAC, then the standard is de facto approved. It then moves it back into the AOAC process to ensure that due process has been assured, addressed all comments, and then that standard is ready to move into the publications process. And that concludes the overall process for development of AOAC standards and consensus documents. What are some uses of AOAC standards? Well, for SMPRs and for most of our documents, AOAC uses them for method approval by its expert review panels and other groups. AOAC standards may be used by method developers and method authors to develop an optimized methodology. They may also, and it is expected that standards, especially standard method performance requirements, are used to validate methods, to serve as a guide along with some validation guidance to validate methodology. And certainly laboratories, to the extent of their desire, may use AOAC standards to guide them in their method verification. One point of clarification around AOAC standard method performance requirements. Our standard method performance requirements and our other consensus standards are not the same as AOAC test methods. AOAC test methods being official methods of analysis, or even our certified methods, performance tested methods. These are not equal to those. However, our standards are used to develop and optimize these methodology. They are used to validate test methods. They're used to evaluate, approved, and adopt test methods. And again, may be used to verify methods. Another way to distinguish AOAC standards from its methods of analysis depends on who is doing the work. So if the volunteer activity involves a working group, then the volunteer responsibility involves development of a standard or a consensus document, such as a standard method performance requirements, validation guidelines, or other guidance, other consensus documents, etc. If the volunteer activity is an expert review panel, then they are evaluating methodology. They are reviewing methodology. They have the ability to adopt methodology, modify, track, and make recommendations on methods published in the official methods of analysis. So if you are a member of a working group, you are developing consensus documents that will be used or may be used for methods. They are not the methods. If you are a member of an expert review panel, then you are reviewing the methods. You're not developing the standards. And what happens is expert review panels may evaluate their methods using the consensus documents developed by working groups. So hopefully that brings out that distinction a little bit more for those trying to understand the difference between AOAC standards and their methods. Documentation and communication. AOAC documents the development and approval process for its standards and methods approval. AOAC prepare all of the summaries of the meetings for both standards development and methods approval. Those summaries are communicated to participants and stakeholders, and the summaries are also published in the Inside Laboratory Management magazine. AOAC publishes its consensus standards in the official methods of analysis, as well as on the AOAC website. And AOAC published the status of its standards and its methods in the standard news section portion of the AOAC Inside Laboratory Management magazine. I hope that this brief overview has been helpful and serve as a resource for you. However, if you have any questions at all on AOAC standards and the official methods program, please do not hesitate to contact me. I may be reached at my email address, dmckenzie@aoac.org. Thank you very much.
All right. So I'd now like to invite Scott Coates up here to talk a little bit about the Research Institute's involvement with CASP. Get your presentation up for you, Scott.
Hi, everybody. I'm Scott Coates. I'm the Senior Director for the AOAC Research Institute, and formerly was the program lead for the CASP program. I, like you, had a daytime job before I started doing that, and so I went back to doing my daytime job and creating some other programs. So had asked somebody who had really proven themselves in running CASP to take over as program lead. What I thought I needed to do today was to inform you about some other programs that we have going on. You know, many of you are new to AOAC. Most of you know, and you now have gotten some background on SMPRs, the Standard Method Performance Requirement, and most of you are quite aware of the Official Methods program. But we have other programs at AOAC, and I wanted to go over those programs with you. Right, so you know the Official Methods program. You might have heard of the Performance Tested program. I'm going to talk to you about that. You might have heard of the Emergency Response Validation program. You might have heard of the Targeted Matrix Extension program. And we're starting a new program to roll out the end of this year, beginning next year, called Reviewed and Recognized, and I'll cover that. All these programs are going to have impact on CASP. So you already know the Official Methods program. It's our premier method validation program. We got more than 3,000 methods in our official methods of analysis compendium. Cover chemistry, biochemistry, biomolecular, and microbiology. And the hallmark of the official methods is collaborative study, where common samples are analyzed by multiple laboratories, primarily to determine repeatability and reproducibility. And they're an international source, as Chris has already alluded to. There's many countries, international organizations that use these methods and contribute their expertise to the development of these methods. And the Official Methods of Analysis Compendium, as you know, one of the most comprehensive and reliable collection of chemistry and microbiological methods available in the world, and many are contained in Codex food standards. So this program you may not be so aware of, but it's important. It's called our Performance Tested Method Program, PTM. It's our program for commercial test kits. And we currently have around 335 certified test kits in our PTM database. And you can see the logo for the Research Institute there on the right. And it also does chemistry, biochemical, biomolecular, and microbiology methods. And we do kind of similar. we have expert reviewers who review the performance claim for accuracy. And the intent of this program is to create a level playing field for method developers. One of the problems we have with commercial methods is sometimes you'll get some players will make claims that they really can't support. So this program creates a level playing field for all of the companies with commercial test kits. And we do many of the similar things that official methods do. We do repeatability, we do LOD or LOQ or probability of detection. We do selectivity or microbiology, inclusivity and exclusivity, and we do matrix effects. Those are all things we share in common with official methods. But because these are commercial test kits, we also do ruggedness testing and lot consistency. Ruggedness testing here, I mean that small changes in the operational parameters don't change performance of the test kit. And then the other thing that's a little bit different is we do an annual review of the test kit and the package insert or user instruction. Make sure that the kit's still working and the package insert is still accurate. So that's our PTM program. We rolled out a new program last year for COVID. So we did 9 test kits for SARS were reviewed, 6 were approved, 9 months from start to approval. ERV is a pertinent and timely program. So this is where we start from nothing. No standards, nothing set up, and we set everything up to do independent testing of these test kits for COVID-19. And we have a 6-member expert review panel. And in this program, if you heard some of the discussion this morning at the Analytical Solution Forum, we did use the Appendix Q, AOAC Appendix Q for in silico analysis for the first time. So here I brag just a little bit. It's a globally recognized and award-winning program. Microval is our sister organization in Europe. They do test kits for European Union, and they wrote that they fully support our AOAC initiative on COVID-19. And then also we were awarded a Power of A, that's Association Silver Award winner. And so this COVID-19 program and the ERV program were really quite successful. And why do I mention all that? Is because it led to another program that we put out there, which is targeted matrix extension. So under this program, understand this program, what you need to know is, for example, we might have 30 or 40 test kits approved for salmonella, but none of them have been approved for cannabis, for salmonella and cannabis. So this program is designed to review test kits that have already approved and extend their claims to for a new matrix like cannabis. And we can do up to 10 test kits at a time. And the unique feature about this program is one study design, one independent laboratory, using common samples by the same personnel, using the same basic lab equipment at basically the same time. That's all important because if you have all the kits going through, all being evaluated at the same place at the same time, it's the most level playing field that you can create. And it's a secondary benefit. If the test kit doesn't work out, doesn't perform, it's a lot harder to say that we messed up in our independent lab when the other 6 out of 9 actually did get approved. So this is an important program. Yeah, and that is the matrix study, and that's Scott Coates in front there, played by Neo, and Nora Marshall, played by Trinity, and Pat Bird, played by Morpheus. So, all right, so what does this mean to you? So we already have done a targeted matrix extension for the total yeast and molds in cannabis. We started with 9 test kits and 7 were approved at this time. And we had 4 regulatory agencies as a part of that expert review panel. We started this program for total yeast and mold because we heard that the state of Michigan was going to require that the laboratories in Michigan use an AOAC validated method. We realized we have a lot of AOAC methods that are validated for total yeast and mold, but not for cannabis. So we quickly set this up in November, and back in May, we approved the 6 test kits, and then one recently was approved. So this program has direct connection with CAP and the work that you do. We use the SMPRs that were created for total yeast and mold as the basis for these reviews. We actually started that under that emergency response validation program that I was talking about, but we realized it's a different situation. With the emergency response validation, you're starting from zero. With the TME program, you have approved test kits for total yeast and mold that just haven't been validated yet for cannabis. So that's why we have these 2 different programs. We just started up in the beginning of August a targeted matrix extension program for Salmonella and or STEC. And this is really a cool program because what we did was we said we're going to mix both Salmonella and we're going to mix also in STEC, the E. coli, into this program so that if you have a test kit for either or a test kit for both, you can code this through this program. So this is really cool. We're doing all these test kits at the same time. We got 8 test kits submitted at the beginning of August, and we should be done around December of this year. So by the end of the year, we will have 7 test kits that were approved for total yeast and mold in cannabis, and 8, probably more like 6 test kits will be approved for Salmonella and or STEC. So those are a whole bunch of new methodologies that have been validated that will can be used by the laboratories. This is our new program. This also is going to be important. It's very similar to the performance tested methods program, but instead of looking at package inserts or user instructions, we're looking at what normally is called application note for an instrument. And in that application note, it describes how this instrument can be used in order to detect, let's say, pesticides in cannabis. And so this is a new program. It'll run about the same time frame as a targeted matrix extension, maybe 6 months or so. We can take methods that have already been approved for pesticide, but not validated for cannabis, and run it through this program. So this is new and coming up, and we're really proud of it. And that's what the logo is going to look like. So it's possible to certify the methods in place. So that's a really cool feature. That means if you got this really expensive piece of equipment that's not been sold, the technology provider can validate it in situ. And the way we do that, if we have an independent lab create the samples are sent to the lab. We have our own technical consultant go to the on-site where it's being tested to make sure everything's on the up and up. The samples that come from the independent lab are blind coded so that the folks at the testing site can't know what's actually in it. And so that'll help move that program. We already have 4 applications and we haven't really opened the program yet. So we have pretty high expectations. I think it will be a really important program. Another nice feature is this can serve as a lead-in to the official message program. It can start in the R-squared program. It's completely complementary to the official message program. Same science, same validation. So these are programs that you'll want to know about as we progress. We started 3 years with CAP creating the standards, And so we are now at that next stage where we're doing proficiency testing and we're doing training and education and we're validating the method. So these couple of programs are in addition to the official method program, help us get those methods out to the community. As I said, we've been doing an R² pilot program since June. We will be reviewing our pilot programs in the next couple months and then rolling it out in 2021. And for AOAC, the benefit is it's a new revenue source in 2022. Actually, the nice thing about that is it's already creating revenue for AOAC. It's always helpful. I mean, we are a nonprofit organization, but we still have to keep the lights on. And so these kinds of programs, the PTM program and the R² program are the kind of programs that generate revenue for AOAC and keep the lights on. So in summary, we continue to develop products and services to serve our members and method developers. We have several new programs that we've successfully started this year. We have more products and services coming, and our aim is to provide a product and a service for every member need. So I don't know if I should take questions, or I know we're a little bit behind.
Yeah, I think we've done.
Okay, questions? Yes. How is it different than the performance tested methods?
Yeah, for proficiency testing.
Oh, proficiency testing. Yeah. All right. So the question is how are these programs different than proficiency testing?
If somebody has a new type of equipment and they want to prove that that method is the same as their PLC, which program would they use?
Both.
Both.
Yes. All right. So these programs that I've reviewed, these are validating the method. The proficiency testing program is demonstrating that a laboratory has proficiency using a validated method. It all ties in together.
Like his house, their proficiency testing program, and they just send out samples to the labs that can use any equipment. And so that's my concept of
Yeah.
proficiency testing, and that just, as long as you can get the same results with that same sample,
Yeah,
then you're good to go.
Yep, it's a common, well, yes. And hopefully they'll want to be using a validated method. Okay, so the question was, the way this works is that with proficiency testing, common set of samples sent out to a number of laboratories, and then we get the results back, and the laboratories essentially get a rating, a Z-bar, where they fall within the range. So that is a measure of the laboratory's ability to get the correct answer. These programs are like provide methods that those laboratories can use. They can use any method they want, but these programs provide methods that have been validated, so presumably they'll have better success with those those methods in their laboratories.
What would the lab use for if they have a new equipment that is different from what the validated method was developed on?
Yes, yeah, they can use their own equipment.
So R² would be one program to get involved with?
Okay, so the two different things, they build on each other. If a technology provider rather than the laboratory, it's got to be the company that manufactures the equipment. If they want to come and have their application note for pesticides and cannabis validated, they have two choices: official methods, which is a little more involved, a lot more involved, or now the R² program. So if you're a laboratory and you're looking to implement a new piece of equipment in your laboratory, the R² program gives you a little bit of heads up that this instrument with this application note has been reviewed by AOAC. So, all right, I've taken enough time. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much, Scott. So next on the agenda will be the product-centric working group. We'll start with Julie Kowalski, who is with us remotely. She'll share her screen in a moment. Real quick before we go there, I realized at the beginning of the meeting, I told all the virtual people how to access the meeting materials. I neglected to mention for the people who are here in person, top of your agenda here, there's a QR code and a link. If you just visit that, you can sign in, you'll get access to the book. With that, should I just ask Julie to share her screen? Okay, I guess I need to stop.
Okay, well, welcome everyone, and I wish I could be there in person, but I'm just not able to make it this year. Is my audio okay?
Yeah, we hear you great, Julie.
Okay, perfect, thanks. Okay, so I'm going to just give you an update partially on the last bit of work that the Chemical Contaminants Working Group did, and then some of what the Product-Centric Working Group has been doing the past few months. So I just want to start and have a shout out to everyone that as of about 2 weeks ago have signed up to be part of a working group, whether it was chemical contaminants or now the product-centric working group. So you can see we have 116 organizations, which is great, and representation from all sorts of different types of organizations. So academic, testing labs, of course, U.S., state and federal government, international government, technology, and service providers. So it's really nice to see that we have a wide range of voices in the working group. Okay, so the Chemical Contaminants Working Group from October 2020 to March 2021, we had about 6 calls, and 1 SMPR was published, and that was for mycotoxin screening technique. And as Chris mentioned, 1 SMPR is making its way through the publication process, and that is for the quantitative method for mycotoxins. So I'll just spend a few minutes going over some of the details of the quantitative analysis for mycotoxins SMPR. We tried to stay fairly consistent with the screening SMPR. So for example, the analytes are the same. So that's the 4 main aflatoxins and then ochratoxin A. So because this was before the product-centric working group, this SMPR was written very generically. So the matrix types that method developers can do and submit a method for includes plant material and then derivatives, which we listed out 4 examples here. And it is intended to be really all-encompassing. So any method that people develop for a cannabis-based product or for plant biomass, we would love for people to submit those methods. So we did spend quite a bit of time in discussion around the target level for this SMPR because of course, we are trying to make a method that's valuable to the largest number of people, and within that, different jurisdictions, states, and countries do have a little bit of variation in their regulatory limits. So that makes it a little bit challenging for the working group to, pick a specific value. What we agreed upon was to have a target value. And that was based on the fact that these particular concentrations are pretty highly conserved across a lot of different regulations in cannabis and even outside of cannabis. But we did add some flexibility in that methods with lower target levels will be accepted. And we didn't really necessarily want to dictate an LOQ in terms of a value, so we just said that it should be less than the target level. So that's how we kind of built in the flexibility in terms of the method performance requirements for our LOQ. And you'll notice that one thing that this group decided, and I thought it was a really good idea, because we had so much discussion around the target level, that if you are a method developer and let's say you're trying to build a method that is going to be workable for as many people, just providing some data showing some example limits can help a method developer really choose how they want to build their target level, just around these levels that are being used in different states and countries. So there's some additional method performance requirements. As I stated, the LOQ is less than the target level. The applicable range just must be stated, the LOD. Again, there was a lot of discussion around this as well. And what we decided to go with was that it must be determined, and that the way that you determine that should be detailed. Recovery was listed, repeatability, reproducibility, and then one addition that the group wanted to make was they did want method developers to go through the exercise of calculating measurement uncertainty and providing that to the expert review panel. So that's the basic components of the this quantitative mycotoxin SMPR. The draft document is online if you want to take a look at it. It was sent out for vote and it was passed with no issues, and the final version will be published soon. So now I'm going to switch gears. That was all the chemical contaminants working group. And then we were asked to reorganize based on some advice from the advisory panel in about May of this year. So instead of doing the traditional, we're interested in residual solvents or cannabinoids or pesticides, the advisory panel has suggested that we use a product focus approach. So they will provide the priorities in terms of what product type or group they feel like is most important for the working groups to work through. And so that when that happened, basically Holly's group, the cannabinoids working group, my group, the chemical contaminants, we combined and became the product-centric working group. And in some of those initial discussions, we had to decide sort of how that work. The nice thing is when we were approached to combine our groups, the advisory panel had already set forth what they felt like the order of products should be. So beverages is what we're currently working on, and Holly's cannabinoids working group had already been working on that, and she'll give you an update on that soon. And then their next priority would be personal care products, and then after that we'll address hemp seed oil. So we got together and decided that we liked this approach and we were going to move forward. We realized that it was really going to be up to the working group to decide within our category of beverages what now is going to be the priority analytes that we should work through stepwise. So the workflow is a little bit different than how other working groups and how previously the working groups had worked. So again, we're going to get the commodity order from the advisory panel, and then because we will be working on multiple SMPRs for a product type or commodity type, we felt it was important that we define the commodity group, even if it's just briefly, so that all of the SMPRs that we build within a commodity type, like beverages, all of the working groups or all of the SMPRs are really built on that same definition. So this is maybe a little bit different than the traditional workflow. So Holly's group had already done a really great job of working on that definition. And we did decide to just formalize it just quickly with a document so that that can be provided to all of the members of the working group as we address and approach each one of the beverage SNPRs. So then the next thing we decided was we felt like we needed to collect some information. So within beverages, what really are the highest priorities? And so we came up with the idea of having just a Google document that everyone could contribute to and provide information on a state or a country and in terms of number one, the category. So where does, in terms of the regulations for a specific area, what term does beverages actually fall under? That's important if you're reading through regulations. And then is that required testing? So is cannabinoids required testing, terpenes, heavy metals, moisture? So we collected all of this information so that we could get a count of the 16 places that we looked at. You know, for example, 13 are requiring heavy metals. And so this helps us prioritize which SNPRs to work through for beverages. And so cannabinoids, obviously, that's pretty much going to be required for everything. So that Holly's been working on that. And I've been working on heavy metals, and then Holly's been working on residual solvents. And then we'll move on to some other ones. So using that data, we can prioritize our SNPRs. And from there, then we just divide and conquer and just start working on the beverage analyte combination SNPRs. So since I believe June of this year, we created the workflow and combined the groups, had at least 6 phone teleconferences. The cannabinoids, which I think Holly will talk to you in more detail about, is now open for public comment. The metals, beverage-specific metals SNPR is very close to being done. We may have to have one more call just to make sure that everything is finalized, but that's nearly complete. And then Holly is working her way through residual solvents as well. Well, that's kind of where we are today. And I do want to take the time to thank all of the volunteers. I really appreciate you guys showing up and discussing and doing a review and submitting information for us, as well as the Aoac Casp staff. They're really great to work with, and I have to give a shout out to Chris. He's very, very flexible in terms of deadlines and providing information, and really great to work with him specifically. So with that, I'm done and I can take any questions.
All right, well, thank you so much, Julia. It was a great presentation. Much appreciated. All right. So with that, I would like to welcome our other chair of the product-centric working group, and she's going to talk about what her half of the group has been up to, Holly Johnson.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. I guess I can take this off so you guys can hear me. Thanks so much to Julie for introducing so much of what I'm going to talk with you guys about today. So again, I'm Holly Johnson. I'm the Chief Science Officer for the American Herbal Products Association and a fairly long-time volunteer for Aoac in standard settings. Super pleased to be here. Oops. Okay, so I'm going to just review for you guys a little bit about the cannabinoids working group that I was the chair of since the inception of CASP. And Julie just gave a really nice overview of how those groups have merged. But last I spoke with you guys in March, we had just finished the laboratory guidance for drying hemp, again, kind of in response to that interim final rule that the USDA issued that was a bit confusing. And then moving on from there, what we did in the cannabinoids working group is start to work on beverages. Again, like Julie mentioned, this was at the direction of the advisory panel. And so what we did is create a draft SMPR for quantitation of cannabinoids in beverages. And, you know, as Julie mentioned, there's all these different analytes, but pretty much cannabinoids are going to have to be tested in everything, right? So I think that's why this was initially one of the working groups. And yeah, so that makes sense. So again, we came up with an SMPR here for determination or quantitation of cannabinoids in beverages. And so had quite a few meetings at the beginning of this group to kind of talk about, or quite a few of our meetings at the beginning were talking about what are these different beverage matrices. So I'll go into that just briefly, but wanted to put up here just kind of the general method performance requirement tables. What you'll notice on this slide is, wow, the lower limit of quantitation is really low. People are putting like wispy little bits of CBD in their beverages. And so again, our mission here at Aoac in general and at Casp specifically is to make standard methods that perform well, that serve our stakeholders, right? And so we're certainly not going to make methods that cover every single different beverage that's out there or any product for that matter, right? So we did find some that were even lower, if you can imagine, than this lower limit of quantitation, but we want to be realistic in terms of method developers and covering the biggest chunk, you know, kind of piece of the products out there without being onerous on the method developer. So quite a low limit of quantitation, you can see there. Also, we had to split up the ranges or the performance requirements because in these super low ranges, as you guys know, as most of you are analytical chemists, it becomes much more difficult to accurately detect and quantify analytes that are in a complex matrix at such a low concentration. So we talked with some of the statisticians and came up with these different ranges within the group and different performance characters. We spent, as I mentioned, quite a bit of time in the working group talking about how to approach this. How do you, you're gonna, the thing with beverages is there's all these different matrices, and say a coffee beverage with milk in it is gonna be a lot different than an orange juice with pulp in it, right? And so had a lot of different discussion, and I put this up here as this was kind of on the left over here was kind of our one of the proposals we talked about in the group in terms of how to separate these matrix categories. Should we do high fat? Because defatting, of course, is a step that's necessary, and that could be milk or any other type of thing that would be in your beverage, as opposed to, say, high polyphenol or high sugar. And each of these things are going to have a different type of step in the sample prep that will allow it to, go into the rest of the analysis. So after much discussion, and thank you, many of you that are here and likely online were part of those discussions, it didn't seem really logistically correct to do what we have here on the left-hand side of the screen. Because some beverages, what we really want is for this to be easy for the labs, right? These methods are going to be adopted by testing labs. When they get in a beverage, they don't necessarily know everything that's in it. And also beverages may fit into several of these categories, right? So like a juice might be high pulp and high polyphenol and high sugar. Which prep do I use? So it was decided that was, even though it makes sense to all of us as analytical chemists, that wasn't really the right route to go to make things, good for the stakeholders. So we came up with what is here on the right. And again, you guys, this is out for public comment right now. This has not yet become an official method. So what we would love, and again, as our whole group has merged and we're going forward with beverages, none of the SMPRs are approved yet. So we could take some input about these categories. And so I'm going to go over just really quickly kind of how we came to these categories. We definitely did some market surveillance. Again, we want to make methods that are the most useful to the most stakeholders that cover most of the products out there. Let's see here. Okay, so we did some market surveillance and went and looked at, what are the beverages that are out there that are available that manufacturers are making and selling either with hemp or with high THC cannabis. So we have here huge category. This probably was the most predominant category is sparkling waters or sodas. Tons of these out there in the marketplace, right? So an example here, this is Day Trip, some hemp infused sparkling water. Another category that we came to, and this seemed to be kind of maybe the second biggest category out there, is just kind of a plethora of different things. You know, you couldn't say this is only teas like green teas or black teas. No, there's all kinds of herbs and things in there. So you'll see some of these pictures here have peach, ginger, blueberry, mint, strawberry, lavender, like all the herbs in the world they're adding, right? And some of them maybe as flavors, some of them maybe like as a little juice infusion, that kind of thing. So this came to be kind of the second most prominent category out there, even though it's not a real unified category. It's basically any kind of herbs and teas and that kind of thing. And I put this up here too, just to give an example of, you guys, people are putting a lot of stuff in their beverages. So this is, it's a sparkling water. So in theory, this would, and this is an example of kind of which category does this go into? And we really want your comments on this. So this is a sparkling water. So you would have to go through the carbonated beverages type of sample prep to remove the carbonation before your analysis, but it also has some other stuff in there. It has blackberry chai concentrate, sugars, organic cane sugar, but schizandra, ginseng, L-theanine, and the hemp. So again, this could even with the categories we came up with and are out for comment now, many beverages still could fall into more than one. So I put this here just for your consideration. Here's another example of again, some more beverages. This is a lemonade with honey. So again, it's going to have sugars as well as maybe some other interfering compounds. Coffee, you'll remember, was one of our beverage categories, and because we just found so many coffees on the market. Good combo, apparently, cannabinoids and coffee. So very popular. There's quite a lot of those out there. So again, this is a CBD infused cold brew coffee, a cannabis iced coffee. Out of these three, I don't think any of them have milk, but there are some coffees out there that also have fats in them, which again could be problematic in terms of sample preparation for your analysis. These are also pods. They're not just making canned, fully processed, like ready to drink beverages. These are coffee pods that you stick in your Keurig that have caffeine in them. So coffee was also one of the categories that we found to be really prevalent. So I'll bring you back just for a moment after that kind of search through the marketplaces to the 4 categories that we kind of came up with for our SMPR that again is out for public comment. So category number 3, again, it's kind of a catch-all, teas and multi-herb blends. That was most of those things I showed you, right? The lemonade would fit in there. The peach ginger tea would fit in there. And then there's carbonated beverages, again, sodas, sparkling waters, and then the coffees. So those were the 3 categories that we found pretty much saturating the market, that were the most prevalent out there. Of course, there's some other things. People are putting hemp and cannabis and CBD in everything. So there's fruit juices, smoothies, shakes, sports drinks, dry powder mixes, wines, beers in some places. So we kind of put this other category, this category as other. So what we've done in, again, the SMPR that's out for public comment is said, we need you to do 4 beverage samples, 1 from each of those categories. So a method developer would have to take 1 carbonated beverage, 1 coffee beverage, and 1 kind of tea or herbal beverage, and then 1 other. And we thought that made sense as kind of covering a broad enough range of the beverage market. Out for public comment, we want you guys to talk to us, all of you guys that are in the labs and doing this stuff and that are manufacturers. So that's where we are with that. We have until September 17th to keep collecting comments from the public before we'll bring this SMPR to a vote for approval. So please do submit your comments. And like Julie mentioned, these categories probably will stay, as we go forward with the other beverage SMPRs. So this is kind of the critical time where you can have your voice heard for a category that will be sticking around. We'll be building standards on for a little while here. So, okay, I don't want to repeat too much of what Julie said, but I'm going to switch gears right now that was our cannabinoids working group and kind of the last SMPR that will come out of that group, because we've now merged into the product-centric working group. And I think this makes a lot of sense. I'm sure many of you have heard about this and you have questions perhaps, but they were both giant working groups. I don't know, Chris, 150 people or something in each group. And what Casp noticed is that there was a lot of overlap. There were maybe 100 humans that were registered in both working groups because it's a similar type of chemistry generally that's used for contaminants and for cannabinoids, right? We think of, again, we're open to any techniques, but the major ones are kind of column separation with various modes of detection, right? As opposed to the microbiology group, which is just a totally different, type of equipment and technology. So it really made sense to kind of merge those experts into one group and go forward from there. So what we did, and Julie showed a little bit of a few more columns of a spreadsheet, and I apologize, I know this is really small, but I just wanted to give you an example of the very first thing that we did, which also Julie mentioned, is we said, okay, we've got beverages as our charge. What do stakeholders need as far as beverages? We know that almost every beverage in every state system or a national system is going to need cannabinoids testing. Awesome. We did that SMPR first in the other group, right? From there, what do you really need to test beverages for in each particular state? So thanks again to all of you guys who contributed, with information from your particular state. And basically what we did is, so this information is for California. And again, there's the BCC, the Bureau for Cannabis Control, which is it's a kind of a separate agency created in the state of California. They have their regs up. And what I want to point out, it's not on here, it kind of was over here in the spreadsheet, but this category name, so like the second category you say there. So again, we had so many people submit information from their state, but most states split these things into different categories. None of the states, to my knowledge, have a specific category called beverages. They just don't. So usually this falls into a category of like other or orally consumed products, right? As opposed to inhalation products and that type of thing. So, but each state does it differently. So even the name of the category is different in each state. So that was one kind of complication. And then we went through and had people say, yep, my state for beverages. So beverages fall into, in California, this category called other products. And in California, they require cannabinoids, terpenes, heavy metals, residual solvents, pesticides, and a variety of microorganisms be tested in finished product beverages. Okay, so we went through and did that for many of the states, and Julie told you a little bit more about that, but that's where we got these priorities. What we figured out is that microbiology is required in finished products in many states, as well as pesticides and residual solvents. So that, actually, that should not say pesticides, it should say heavy metals, sorry. But those were our three priorities, as Julie mentioned. So Julie took over the heavy metals SMPR, and many of you guys have been participating in that. And as she said, they've had several meetings and they're getting really close to a finished SMPR there. We've only had one meeting so far for the residual solvents track, which is the one that I'm facilitating. And what we learned is that there already is a CASP SMPR from 2019 for residual solvents in cannabis products. And again, this did not specify beverages. It was kind of a more general SMPR, and this came out in 2019, and we've had 0 methods submitted. So we took a look at the SMPR and tried to figure out, maybe why have we had no methods submitted? And it's great that the group did so much work on this back in 2019, because now we can kind of use this as a template moving forward. So we took a look at this template, and what they did back in 2019 is really use the United States Pharmacopoeia's General Chapter 467 as a guide. And 467 was developed by USP for drugs. And so it's quite a large list. I mean, this is too small for you guys to read, but this is only half the table in the SMPR. It goes down below this. So just to give you an idea that there's many, many, many residual solvents that were included as required analytes in the 2019 SMPR. And we kind of pontificated that possibly that was a reason why we've had no submissions, because there were so many required analytes that any given method developer in any state may not need to do all those things. And, I think I'll mention here too, the world of cannabis and hemp is so strange in its, regulatory, kerfuffle or madness that is out there with just this patchwork of different regs in different states. And in dietary supplements, which is where I spend a lot of my time working, the manufacturer themselves sets specifications, right? So if I was going to make a hemp extract to go into a dietary supplement, and I made that extract using ethanol, I would perhaps test for ethanol. I would set a specification and say, you know what, I don't want residual ethanol or whatever the solvent is in my end product. So I'm going to put a specification there that we must test for that residual solvent. But you know what I didn't use when I made my hemp extract? Any of this other stuff. So why would I need to test for any of this other stuff? So just to remind you guys that in the world of at least dietary supplements that's regulated under Title 21 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 111, the manufacturer themselves are responsible for setting, specifications and limits on contaminants that may adulterate. So in cannabis, of course, everything is much more, especially in the high THC cannabis world. In the state systems, things are very prescriptive. And that's fine because they're not, under this federal system. So what we did is, and again, just to mention, USP 467, the general chapter, was developed for drugs. And many of these drugs are manufactured in giant manufacturing facilities where they actually use many of these solvents in the production of these drugs. And so it makes sense to test for them, right? So again, we want to be rational. We want to do things that will really help our stakeholders here at CASP. So what we did is, again, and thank you so much to all the participants in the working group who have submitted so much work that they've done in their own companies or organizations. This is a little excerpt from a spreadsheet that that was put together by some working group members, and basically saying, okay, what is Alaska? Going through all this in alphabetical order, it's the most amazing piece of work, and such a blessing that we got this. But basically, Alaska requires, you can see here, 6 solvents be tested in, and again, this goes to product category too. Is this in extracts? Is this in beverages? What we think is that these are in beverages, but I will be going and checking these, sites like the Bureau of Cannabis Control to make sure we have the right info. But so we see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 are required in Alaska. Then you go down and look at the next one, Arizona, it goes off the bottom of the page here. There's, 20 or 30 solvents required in Arizona. Complex, right? And then we go through the list of all these other states, and we see here, Hawaii requires, 6. My home state, by the way. Go down one more, and Louisiana requires the same 6, but just with one addition, ethanol. So this is kind of where we're at right now in developing this SMPR, is we're trying to assess what are the most important residual solvents that the stakeholders really need to have analyzed that will benefit the most stakeholders in the most states. And so that's kind of where our process is right now in the working group. We're trying to kind of perhaps pare down that list from the USP 467 and from the 2019 residual solvents working group to kind of get to something more manageable and usable that might be able to be done in maybe a single method, maybe this kind of thing. And then we'll probably end up, again, I don't want to predict what will happen with the experts in the working group, but we may end up with a list of required solvents that might be, hopefully shorter than the whole list from the 2019 SMPR, and then a list of other potentially, desirable or additional solvents that you may include, depending if you're developing a method in a state that requires those. So again, not to predict where our expert working group will take this SMPR, but that's where we are right now, is trying to figure out a kind of rational solution to what are the most important residual solvents that are required in most states, and how can we make an SMPR that's the most useful to the most stakeholders. So again, here's in just kind of the beginning of our product-centric working group, residual solvents, SMPR. We've got an applicability here. And that's, I think, all I have for you guys today. Any questions?
I've got an online question.
Yes.
I have one question asking if you knew about the concentrate for beverages, THC and CBD concentrate. Would the working group be considering adding that to the beverage?
Interesting. I'm not sure that I've seen those in the marketplaces, but certainly, and maybe they mean by concentrate, not a liquid concentrate, because that would kind of, but like a powder. So we did have that in kind of the other category, where it would be things like a powder that you then would add water to or add juice to and mix. I assume that's what they mean by concentrates. So yeah, that something like that would fall into our other category of the 4 matrices. And again, it's going to be weird because some method developers might choose a beer, and some might choose a sports drink, and some might choose a smoothie, and some might choose one of these concentrates. So yeah, we've definitely talked about that, and there's been some discussion already in Julie's kind of track as well as mine about these limits. We're setting limits, and does that apply to the actual powder or what would be the finished product? And again, this has not been well thought out by some of the state regulators because I don't think they took that into consideration, right? But the limits and how this is normally done, limits that are set on metals for dietary supplements, et cetera, is done at the concentration that you would consume, at your final concentration. And that's the limit, is usually a per serving or a per day intake limits on metals and things like that. So yeah, We'll be curious to see if any method developers test for residual solvents in some type or metals in some type of concentrates. Good question. Oh, please. Oh yeah, can you step to the mic so we can hear your question?
Sure. In this development, are you addressing sampling? So pre or post package? Because that could probably impact.
I've never seen an SMPR that addressed sampling, so not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Obviously a very important thing. Actually in beverages, you would think would actually be kind of in a better place there because it would be homogenized into a final finished product. Yeah, so that's definitely, I get what you're saying, the packaging and how packaging might affect stability. Is that what you mean? Yeah, so that's outside the scope of this SMPR for sure. We're just coming up with methods to do the actual analytical testing. Those types of things are up to, manufacturers and other people to do stability testing and interaction testing with their particular packaging, but definitely an issue we've seen. Please go ahead.
I'm just kind of curious how they're getting away with being able to have residual solvents at levels that way exceed drinking water levels.
I'm so sorry. I can't hear you. Maybe just pop your mask off so we can understand you.
Yeah, need a mask out here.
Sorry.
But yeah, these masks are a pain in the ass. But anyway, so just kind of curious how, in this kind of industry, you're able to get away with levels that way exceed drinking water levels for these residual solvents like benzene, 1 ppm, and toluene at thousands of ppm. Right, so in sparkling water and bottled water, right, the levels are drinking water levels among states. I'm just curious why they're allowed to have that much residual solvent in beverages. Just curious.
Gosh, that's a great question for our regulators that make those rules, right? I think one of the things I tend to say often is, hey guys, call a scientist. Please call a scientist before you write statutory language or rules, regulations that we all then struggle with for the next 20 years, right? They're very hard to change once statutes and regs are put in place. It's a very good question. I'm not sure what the basis for each state setting certain limits. And that's when we did our analysis and that we're still kind of going through looking at the different states, they're not uniform. It's not like every state has the exact same limit for ethanol or hexanes. They're different. So states clearly, the people writing these rules are getting, their limits from different places and maybe relying on, some sources for drugs versus other things. But yeah, it's an issue. And that's also what we've been running into all along in CASP is it's really difficult with this kind of patchwork of different state regulations to make one standard method that's actually applicable nationally, let alone internationally, right? Because each state has different things. This was a big issue with our pesticides SMPR development because some states require 3 and some states require 68 and some states require none. So it's a great question and one of the challenges with cannabis and hemp regulations. Any other questions? Awesome. I will get off the stage. I think we're running a little bit behind, but I also want to send just a shout out, my sincerest thanks to the staff at Aoac and CASP. I'm a volunteer in a lot of organizations, and it's hard to run volunteers because they also have day jobs, right? And so just want to say the whole CASP and Aoac team is fantastic. Susan Idino, our fearless leader in the group of CASP, always there for scientific and technical help, and Chris Dent, the most amazing.
Thank you, Holly. Awesome presentation. Thank you so much, Holly and Julie. Great presentations on the product-centric working group. So as I said earlier, if that's something you'd like to participate in, please go ahead and fill out the form. If you signed in, you should have gotten an email that will have some links, including how to sign up. It's also in the meeting book. But yeah, it's a great, exciting project, and we'd like to have you involved if you're interested. With that, we'll move right on to the next item in the agenda, which is our proficiency testing working group. Brent Wilson from NIST will be talking to us about that. Brent is joining us remotely, so I'm going to stop our screen share and turn it over to Brent. Brent?
All right.
Yeah. All good.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, thanks. So let me pull this up here. All right, well, first let me start off by thanking everybody for being here today. And sad that I'm not able to be there in person, but thank you for the opportunity for to give an update on what the proficiency testing working group has been doing, and also kind of broadening it out to the entire program itself over the next few minutes. The CASP proficiency testing program is encompassing kind of 3 different components. The program itself, which is run by Shane Flynn, the director, and his staff, Chad Steffen, who kind of is like the role doing a lot of the planning and minutes and stuff. They really provide a lot of valuable help to me as the chair, but also other members that are taking part in the program. And then there's the advisory task force, which I'll go in a little bit more detail. And next slide. Then there's the working group that I chair that we've actually split it up into multiple subgroups. I think about 7 or 8 of them now total. But in general, so the program itself, Shane and them have been working on trying to get a test material provider in line to help them in securing a hemp matrix that would meet the technical requirements that are being established by the subgroups that are meeting. They are starting out with a focus on cannabinoids, moisture, and pesticides in hemp plant samples. There is a desire to go into higher THC cannabis samples, but for now, with the shipping issues across state lines, they're focusing on hemp plant materials for now. They are also working with website developers and statisticians to provide providers to build a secure PT website, but also how exactly they're going to design and develop the electronic reports that the program would be providing to the participants. And one of the things that they've been doing here, and pretty much every time a subgroup meets, they ask for the members to provide any type of information about how they currently are submitting data to other programs that they might be taking place, because they kind of want to take all that information into their understanding of when they're trying to develop the reports that they're going to provide to the participants. Then last is the actual design of the studies in the PT program. So we heavily are influenced by SMPRs and the approved official methods. These are drastically needed for the program to move forward. As the way it's designed, they provide the opportunity for laboratories to submit measurements using both in-house and AOAC approved methods. So a lot of times we do try to take the method authors into consideration, and we do heavily look at the SMPRs during the subgroup meetings and the design of what we're providing information to the PT program. So next with the advisory task force. So since I last updated in the mid-year meeting, they have assembled a group of 9 people that are going to make up the advisory task force. They do cover both here in the U.S. and also international, and they do range a different expertise across cannabis and hemp all over the community aspect of it. They will work with AOC staff to help implement the technical recommendations that are determined by the subgroups, which I'll cover a little bit on the next coming slides. But they also will provide expertise on the specific analytes and matrices and organisms and analytes that they're incorporating, but also deal with any issues that might arise. As you can expect, everything's not always going to go perfectly as planned in the real world, so it's good to have a group of people that can meet and work out through any issues that could come up on the analytical side of things. So the working group itself, the role is still the same, it hasn't changed. That we do recommend the technical requirements needed for the PT program to take into consideration for cannabis and hemp. Past meetings prior to the last time I gave you an update, it focused on cannabinoids, moisture, and pesticides. But since the mid-year meeting, we have had meetings, subgroup meetings with the microbiologicals, pesticides again, and also included heavy metals. So the microbiological subgroup, so we kind of focused on the 4 SMPRs that have been developed. I know that I think there was one method maybe that was submitted, but it hasn't been approved yet. So we're really looking for to see if more labs will be submitting methods for potential approval so that we can really kind of build upon what the information that they're getting. But some of the general requirements that really kind of set home is 10 to 15 grams of sample needed to be provided to the participants to ensure similar amounts of what they would routinely do in their laboratory. Dried hemp. So one of the things that's actually going to be fairly consistent through the next few slides is we actually referred back to that document that Holly and her her working group did that talked about defining basically dried hemp basically it being under 15% moisture. And that was a hot topic across all the groups that we've met. That's really kind of brought moisture itself, because we do have a moisture subgroup really more into the forefront for what the program is going to be trying to develop. But essentially what it was recommended is 15% might be dried, but it was really recommended for the moisture to be less than 6% to really try and limit the amount of issues that could come along with the sample. But then the lab itself would have to rehydrate that sample after receiving it into their normal protocols that they would do in our laboratory. With the pesticide subgroup, one of the reasons why we had another follow-up meeting is because we wanted more input from the subgroup, but also part of the issue is with the AOAC, with the SMPR method, or sorry, document that's out there, is that it has a very large number of pesticides included on it. And part of the goal was in that meeting was working with Julie from as the chair at the chemical contaminants at the time, was to try and see if there was a possible way of narrowing down the scope of what the PT program would include in their tests that they would offer for targeted analytes, and then maybe that could also be worked back in somehow with the SMPRs at a later date. But essentially they will just, AOAC would randomly select a set number of pesticides for both a qualitative and quantitative analysis. And some, again, similar requirements, 5 to 10 grams of sample, trying to take into account doing multiple replicates of extraction and analysis. And also highly recommended that the hemp be dried, having a moisture less than 15%, similar to some of the other working groups has told us. And then last is the heavy metal subgroup. So one of the big topics that was at first we were discussing was just what heavy metals should be included. So the SMPR targeted analytes that were required were the big four, essentially, that's typically in food. But then there was also another 7 or 8 that were optional, and it was felt by the people on the call that we really wanted to provide the option for all of them to be included. It really wasn't going to make a big difference on how the PT program were setting it up if they only chose 4, if they chose 12. So the decision was made to include all of these that were possible, and it's still up for debate if it'll be limited to this. I mean, it could always be a potential if a particular element became, or heavy metal became more important at some point, then it could also they can easily adjust how they're doing the program. We also included Jenny Nelson on the call, as she's the one of the primary method authors, I would say, on the method that was just recently approved by the ERP for heavy metals. So again, this is something that we're going to also reach out and try to do in the future as methods do get approved for by the ERP, is to try and make sure we include the method authors on the subgroup meeting so that we can make sure to take into account their methods, and making sure that the program is designed to make sure that we are including enough sample to meet their requirements, or the analytes that are needed to be included and such. And so that was a big part of what we included in this last discussion or subgroup meeting that we had. And basically summarize some of the requirements they put in: minimum 5 grams of dried hemp, make sure again the moisture, it was dried less than 15%. The working group also really stressed for the PT program to work more in the unit standpoint of like mass by mass instead of parts per billion, because of some concern about doing mass by mass or mass by volume when you do a parts per billion calculation. So that's something that they're going to be taking into consideration. And then also they stress a desire for it to be different from how a lot of the normal the PT program that is current, a lot of them are participating currently, where they'll get a spiked sample in a bottle, and then they're recommended to like add their digestive solvent, their acid, to the bottle before they do the digestion. The laboratory people that were on the call really suggested a non-spike sample that would be more similar to what they're actually measuring in their laboratory. They really thought that would be of big importance. Then also including a control material to ensure, especially if you're going to go at non-spike levels, some of these heavy metals are going to be at very low levels in the sample, and it would really help to provide a control material or potentially a blank material, just so that laboratories can confirm whether or not how confident they are in the results they're getting if you're going to provide an extremely low level sample for heavy metals. And next, so all the subgroups that have met already are kind of in a point where they're going to wait and see what the advisory task force designs with the PT program and discuss the information that we've gathered so far. And then there's a good possibility they might come back and want more information from the subgroup, so the past subgroups might go ahead and start to meet again, just to kind of answer some of the questions, or potentially do it a lot through emails. One of the things that Shane and the team do really well is they do a lot of email correspondences trying to get information from the participants, because not everybody can make the calls when we have them. So it's just trying to take into account everybody's information. And then some of the final target subgroups to include for plant material, which is the primary focus, is just the flower right now, is water activity, which is also part of the moisture working group or subgroup, and then mycotoxins and terpenes. Now, with that, I'd like to thank you all for being here. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer any of them. But what I will also do is kind of pose a question to the audience, and something for you to think about for the next hour or so before we get to the discussion panel at the end. But part of the question is there something else that you would like to see the PT working group working on to maybe provide something that could help in the realm of propensity testing that currently you feel might be lacking out in the industry? And the idea is more just we're providing a lot of great information to Shane and the PT program, but just trying to see if there is actually more we could be doing to help the CASP community. And with that, thank you. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer them.
Doesn't look like it, Brent. Thank you so much. Great
Okay.
presentation. We'll follow up on the future of the PT at the panel discussion later.
All right. Thank you.
All right, guys. Well, we are at break time, and we are actually exactly on time. We have a break from 3 to 3:15. We've got some goodies in the back, brownies, cookies, soda. Do make sure you come back after it, though, because the rest of the agenda is going to be really good. So we'll see you guys in 15 minutes. 3:15. All right. I'll kind of get a little. Telling Nora, I wish I had brought my gavel. Inside my phone, baby. Okay, if everybody could please take their seats, we're going to get started again in just a moment. Come on. Slideshow. Hey, Nick, give me a hand up here. Thanks. I don't know why it's not going into presentation mode. Weird.
Yeah, let's
Yes. Oh, good. Cool. All right. Thank you so much. I hope you all had a good break. It's my pleasure to introduce the chair of our microbiology working group, Julia Bramante.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for being here today. So as was mentioned a little bit previously, my name is Julia Bramante and I am the chair of the Microbial Contaminants Working Group, and I'm also the Cannabis Reference Laboratory Manager at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. So since the last CASP meeting, we have held our regular teleconferences with the Microbial Contaminants Working Group, which has maintained its very large size, as some of the other chairs noted today, and Chris did as well. There's been an immense amount of involvement in all of the working groups, and they've really comprised individuals from all different facets of the industry and government. And so it's been really great to see all these different levels of involvement and insight be incorporated into the working groups groups as we proceed. So we held regular teleconferences from April through August, so this month of this year. And in that time, we completed the total yeast and mold count SMPR, and it went through its voting period and was accepted for publication. So it should be published very soon. And so after that point, we looked to the advisory panel for CASP to see what our next priority or task would be. And so there was a lot of interest for us to develop a guidance document for the validation of microbiological methods for cannabis and cannabis products. So that was our next task that we focused on. And so this guidance document for validation is very similar, or has been intended to be very similar to AOAC's Appendix J. So Appendix J is a similar validation guidance document that was drafted for food and environmental services. And so this was an opportunity for us to take a very, again, similar document and apply it to cannabis, and also to incorporate different sections or any other extensions on sections that we think are relevant to cannabis. And so from that, the group had a very long discussion, and we talked about what we thought different areas of either focus or concern were within the cannabis space that we'd want to see addressed in this validation guidance document to be helpful and to help laboratories and also, of course, method developers in developing their validation studies and creating consistency across the industry. So with that, in that first meeting, we also got into a very long discussion about the different matrix types within the cannabis space. And so from that, we decided it made sense to have one of these subgroups that were formed be a matrices subgroup. We then formed also decontamination of matrix. And this came up as a subgroup topic because that was something that had come up in conversation in the working group and developing other SMPRs periodically over time. So we thought it would be worth forming a subgroup to specifically discuss what considerations needed to go into decontaminating matrix for the purpose of validation. And so I'll go into more detail on each of these subgroups in just a moment. The next was suitability of testing media, quantitative versus qualitative validation guidance, requirements for reference methods, and then lastly, requirements for in silico data analysis. And that's actually something that Palmer or Landy brought up today in the Analytical Solutions Forum. And so I'm really excited that the working group is also putting focus into this because I think it will continue to be increasingly relevant. All right, so first I just wanted to show everyone, because I think not everyone here is necessarily familiar with Appendix J. So this is just the table of contents, and as you can see, this is very extensive. And so what's great about that is a lot of the material that's listed here can actually be utilized in this cannabis validation guidance document that we're developing. So many of these are definitions. There's also broad sections that address qualitative method validation guidance, then also quantitative method validation guidance. And so we started with this as kind of our template and framework, and we're able to pull from different sections, but also use this to highlight areas that we think might be missing when we're looking at cannabis specifically. So from there, I'm just going to go into each subgroup briefly and then just discuss some of the work that's been done in each and where everything's standing now. So the matrices subgroup is being led by Steve Krupe. And all of these subgroups are being led by just volunteers within each working group. And then the members of the subgroups are also members of the working group that have volunteered to commit extra time in order to help develop this guidance document. And so I want to extend a huge thanks because I know this has been a lot of time and effort put forth by all of our different working group members. So with this, we started off with matrix categorization. So from that first meeting we had regarding this validation guidance document, the working group had begun discussing different broad matrix categories and some of the subcategories underneath that. And so I just have a snapshot of this listed on this slide. But as you can see, this is already very lengthy, and that's, I think, just the very beginning of infused edibles. I think we probably had over a page of subcategories of infused edibles alone. Then you go into non-edibles like topicals and creams and whatever else may fall in that category. And so we had this huge list that's really great to start with, but we looked to the subgroup to say, okay, how can we now take this list of categories and subcategories and try to condense them and look at them in a way that will help provide guidance to method developers. So the subgroup took this and they have put a lot of effort into accomplishing that. So some of the considerations they've taken into account so far are to take these subcategories and then also look at the different physical and chemical properties within each of the subcategories listed there to try to create logical, again, assignments to each of them, and then have from that other groups be able to give guidance on how to process samples of that type. So an example of this would be for, let's say, cannabis concentrates. If there is a certain subcategory of concentrate that's particularly hydrophobic, then that might be processed a little bit differently than a concentrate like bubble hash that might be able to go into solution a bit more easily. So the next subgroup is decontamination of matrix. And so this was identified as the useful subgroup, again, because this is a topic that came up frequently within the working group over time. And this is being led by Tess Edom. And so this group has done a lot of work drafting what considerations need to go into decontaminating matrix that's intended to be used for validation. So a common example of this is if you're preparing cannabis flower, for instance, to go through method validation, and you want to have a quantitative analysis done on that matrix. Sometimes it may be useful to decontaminate the matrix first and then spike into it so that you can have a good representation of what your spiking values were and what your recoveries are from that matrix overall. But the difficulty here is that a lot of very effective decontamination approaches may compromise the integrity of the matrix. And so that could then not be a good representation of what you're actually going to be testing. So from that, the group has defined two main focal points within their guidance document so far. So the first focal point is the decontamination approach. So again, this goes into all the different decontamination methods that have been observed in the industry for various sample types. So some of these are gamma irradiation, heat sterilization like autoclaving, microwaving, treatment with reactive oxygen. Any of those would fall under that category. And then beyond that, they then went into another area of focus to look at the methods to confirm integrity of product maintained following this decontamination. So in order to confirm the integrity of the product or lack thereof after decontamination, some of the main, characteristics that they have outlined to look for in the matrix after that point would be, of course, microbial load, then also cannabinoid profile, terpene profile, water activity and moisture content, physical characteristics like color and texture. Those have all fallen into that guidance. And so this again is just being further discussed and now condensed from the breadth of information that's been noted there. And so that subgroup, I think, is coming close to a final product to suggest we put into the guidance document. The next subgroup is suitability of testing media, and this is being led by Salvatore Parisi. And so the scope of this is that the suitability test should demonstrate that tested products have no inhibitory effects on the growth of selected control microorganisms under aerobic conditions. And so with this, some of the main guidance sections are preparation of test strains that would then be used in this suitability of testing media protocol, and then finally the suitability of the method in the presence of the tested product. And so really what this is trying to outline is how to evaluate any inhibitory effects that are potentially in the testing media, and then how to overcome that. So one way to overcome potential inhibitory effects would be through dilution, another is through neutralization. If you have a product that needs to be homogenized into an aqueous solution because it's more hydrophobic, it may require the addition of a surfactant. And so all of these are great ways to, again, prepare this sample to then be tested for the analyte of interest. But there also needs to be a way to ensure that in preparing the sample to be tested, it's again not inhibiting any of these analytes of interest. So they have gone through a number of different reference documents from USP. They've taken a lot of information from USP 51 and then also 61, 62, and 1111. They also looked a lot into FDA BAM and ISO to kind of compile this outline and then apply it to cannabis. So there's been a lot of great work done there. And I think, again, they're also coming very close to a final product to be put into the validation guidance document. Next is quantitative versus qualitative validations. And so this subgroup is being led by Susan Audino. And so for this, it's interesting because this was posed as something that was, again, needed to be addressed in the validation guidance document. But quantitative and qualitative validation test protocols are very thoroughly outlined in the pre-existing Appendix J. And a lot of those considerations will be consistent when applied to cannabis. So in that sense, that makes our jobs a little bit maybe easier or clear in that regard. And so here I've just listed the definitions of qualitative and quantitative method that are located in Appendix J. But something that's really interesting that has arisen from the emergency response validation study that was done for yeast and mold is that there's this other category of method that is being referred to as threshold-based microbiological methods. And so what this is truly a qualitative test that's looking to give a pass-fail or a detected not detected result at a set threshold. The main difference there between what we traditionally consider a qualitative method to this threshold method is that these thresholds that are being set are often a bit higher than what you would think in a traditional presence absence test. So this was applied for action limits for yeast and mold of, let's say, 10,000 CFU per gram. Then a threshold could just be set at that level. So then a method could say, okay, this sample passes, therefore it's less than 10,000 CFU per gram, or this sample failed, that's just telling you that it was more than 10,000 CFU per gram. So that group has had a lot of conversations surrounding even the conceptual principles of having this threshold-based microbiological method, and then also some guidance if someone is to choose to go that route. The next group is requirements for reference methods. And so then this is really just looking to provide some guidance about what documents or standards or references can be pulled from in order to have some guidance to develop or use a reference method. So this is being led by Shanaz Dave. And some of the guidelines retrieved have come from entities like AOAC, of course, FDA BAM, ISO, Health Canada, USP, Dairy Standard Methods. Those are all being comprised underneath this subgroup. And then, like what has happened in many other subgroups, determinations for test portions per matrix category were also highlighted in this subgroup as something that needs to be included. And so I think it's really interesting because, again, this matrix kind of challenge is something that's come up in almost every single subgroup, and each of them are developing guidance that interplay with one another. So it will be, I think, really beneficial to see how that all comes together in the final product. And so the last subgroup is the requirements for in silico data analysis. And again, I think this is a very exciting subgroup and additional guidance that will be incorporated into this document because, again, in silico data analysis is becoming increasingly relevant and useful in many different industries. So this is being led by Maria Nelson. And this is largely being based on AOAC Appendix Q, which is recommendations for developing molecular assays for microbial pathogen detection using modern in silico approaches. And so something to note is that while this is, again, very beneficial and provides a lot of additional information that can be helpful when developing methods, this is considered to be a supplemental analysis to include with method validation, and it's not a replacement for laboratory testing. But it can be very useful, especially if a method developer is developing, let's say, a primer and probe set, and they want to run this study to see how it may perform. This can provide a lot of useful information for that. So by utilizing available databases combined with modern bioinformatics and physical modeling tools, in silico analysis can be used to predict the selectivity of a molecular assay. So that would include assays like PCR and real-time PCR, which we see a lot in the cannabis space, against tens of thousands of known sequences. So what this means is that it's, again, theoretically taking a molecular assay and showing, let's say, it says it's going to detect salmonella. It will compare it against tens of thousands of sequences of different salmonella strains, and it can give you information about which of those would match up with that assay and which may not. And then so that would be considered inclusivity, which listed there. And then in addition to that, it can also give information on what would not be detected underneath that assay. So that would go into the exclusivity category. And this is also accomplished through physical chemistry modeling. All right, so that concludes everything the subgroups are working on, but as you can see, there's been a lot of information and I think an incredible amount of work, and I'm just so impressed and grateful for all of our volunteers putting so much time into it. And I think there's going to be a really robust validation guidance document that's going to come from this. So that's very exciting. And I'll just put this out here now. If that piqued anyone's interest, we're always looking for more volunteers, and the subgroups are definitely open to taking anyone's input and insight. So if you do want to get involved, please feel free to reach out. So this is just an overview, and I know Scott touched on this earlier, but I just wanted to give a recap on the performance tested method status of some of the methods that were taken through this emergency response validation study. This wasn't something that was overseen by the working group, but there was some interface between the working group and the PTM study because we were working on the yeast and mold SMPR almost concurrently with the study taking place. So this is really exciting. We have 7 methods now that have PTM status for yeast and mold analysis, and all 7 are listed there. All this information is also available on AOAC's website. So if anyone wants to dig a little bit deeper into these methods, feel free to do so there. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on the microbial contaminants ERP. So we did just recently meet at the beginning of this month, and there were 2 methods for review as matrix extensions to apply to cannabis. So again, what that means is that these 2 methods had already received official methods approval, but it was not under the scope of cannabis and cannabis products. There were other matrix types that were within that scope. So each of these method developers conducted the matrix study under the scope of their methods and submitted those for review, and both of them were approved. So that's really exciting. So we now have our first 2 methods that have gone through the microbial contaminants ERP process and have been approved now. So really great work to everyone on that as well. And so I would like to conclude by extending a huge thanks to the working group, all of our volunteers, and of course to the AOAC team. Thank you, Susan, for always providing so much guidance and helping out and even stepping up to run one of the subgroups. That has been immensely helpful. Thank you, Chris, for everything you do. We literally could not do it without you. And thank you all for listening today. And with that, I can have some questions.
Do it one on one.
We do have a question. It states, for requirements of reference methods development subgroup, how do you account for ISO in Health Canada where it may not be as legal for sales as in certain U.S. states? Is this considered for standards? And then they also ask, yeast and mold approval is missing, and MC media tag yeast and mold also has approved for PTM.
Yeah, I think I understood. So I'll start with the first question. Regarding varying legality of the manufacture and sale of cannabis in different regions, that shouldn't necessarily affect the I guess, guidance to follow different reference standards or methods for analysis. Again, those are just being provided as guidelines and as documents that can be pulled from when trying to establish a reference method, but it's not quite going into the regulatory framework surrounding those different analyses and products. So there shouldn't be an issue there. However, because there's different, I guess, legality and regulations in various regions, there might be certain entities that will have more materials at certain times surrounding a certain type of analysis than others. That would really, I think, be the big difference there. And then for PTM status, I think they're saying that there was a method missing from that slide. So I do apologize if there was one missing. I pulled it from the website, but I can go double check and make sure that's up to date. Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Julia. Okay, yeah, thanks to Julia. She, as she said, wears multiple hats, chairing the working group and the ERP. Not quite sure how she keeps up with it all, so thank you, Julia. With that, we will move into Toby Astel's presentation. Toby was not able to be with us today, but we have a recording. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Nick to get that one going. Oh, yeah, of course.
Good afternoon. My name is Toby Astel, and I am the chair of the CASP Training and Education Working Group. I'm sorry I could not be there in person today, so I'd like to spend a few minutes just summarizing the activities this year for the group. But firstly, I would like to say a huge thank you to all those that have supported the CASP Working Group to date. These are unique times we are working in, and I really appreciate everybody's extra efforts to share their insight and knowledge to the greater AOAC cannabis testing community. Specific thanks goes to the AOAC team who have managed to run the logistics, the registration, and the webinars seamlessly this year. Thank you. I'd also like to say a huge thanks to each panel and seminar presenter that took the time to educate and help us understand some of the unique challenges faced in the cannabis and hemp testing industry. And lastly, to everybody here today and beyond that is active in the working group, if I have not connected with you yet and you're interested in learning more, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at the end. Firstly, I'd just like to recap 2021 so far. In the spring, we hosted 4 seminars that covered starting up a cannabis lab, and then 3 specific workflow seminars on the microbial, heavy metals, and chemical contaminants in cannabis. We had some excellent attendance, and I look forward to building off some of the feedback that was given after these events. We then also had a great in-depth seminar course by Dr. Adino on navigating a laboratory accreditation. And I also look forward to taking that feedback and offering more extended training options in the future. We recently saw the USDA update on the final hemp rule that was enlightening on this new CBD hemp industry that's opening up. And lastly, we've just completed the first installment of our vape science overview. There'll be a second part coming shortly after the annual meeting. But what we've been able to see is that the attendance has been widespread for these activities, which is great as we're getting a great representation of the cannabis and hemp testing ecosystem and the regulatory environments that they each work in. We've had attendees from the cultivator vertical, the extraction and manufacturing vertical, and also a significant amount of third-party testing labs attend, as well as a number of government and academic agencies attending for their knowledge. I look forward to extending the audience both domestically and internationally in the coming efforts. So what we have planned for the remainder of the year is a follow-up to the vape testing panel you saw last month. This one will focus in on understanding the heavy metal science and potential challenges in studying vape chemistry. Following this, taking from the feedback from our earlier seminars, we will be selecting representation from the extended cannabis and hemp vertical, including speakers from the cultivation environment, the extraction lab environment, product manufacturing, and final testing and auditing. This is to give an idea of the different business and scientific challenges throughout this industry. I also would like to extend the invitation to anybody here today that is interested in speaking on a seminar on the validation of cannabis testing methods. This was one of the highest priorities we saw from the recent poll. And if anybody is interested in sharing their time to update the working group and the audience, I'd love to connect. Lastly, we've also received considerable interest around testing cannabis beverages specifically. So if you have expertise in this area and would like to participate, please shoot me an email at the end of the conference. As we've been discussing over the last few months, the world is quite unique still with the pandemic taking hold of people's travel. What we realize is that coming to the audience via webinars and remotely is likely going to be the most efficient. But we do have interest in extending those training courses as mentioned before. If you have any suggestions or options for improving the engagement or the platform we use, please let me know. Specifically, if you are calling in from a country outside of North America, I would be interested in connecting with you to understand how we can put together an international subgroup so that we can share our insight of the various testing and regulatory markets around the world. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me by email shown here if you have any questions or suggestions for this working group. Please include the subject line Aoac Casp Education, and I'll be sure to get back to you as quickly as possible. Until then, have a great conference, stay safe, and talk soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Right. Well, virtual thank you to Toby. As I said, he wasn't able to join us today, so if you do have any questions about the training and education working group, shoot me an email and I'll get that to Toby and we'll make sure to get them answered for you. With that, I'm going to introduce our next presenter, Katie Mueller from the National Safety Council. We've got that on demand as well, Nick, right? Okay. And Katie's presentation is recorded, but she will be available for questions at the end.
Hi, I'm Katie Mueller. I'm the Senior Program Manager at the National Safety Council, and I'm here to talk about our cannabis testing regulations research project. My background is in public health communications and injury prevention, so please forgive me for my non-scientific verbiage today. I know most of you are very familiar with the topic, and so I appreciate your grace on that. The National Safety Council is an over 100-year-old organization that has research-based programs with 15,000 employer members representing over 150,000 workers in the U.S. and abroad. Our mission of saving lives from the workplace to any place really translates to focusing on eliminating the leading cause of preventable death and injury. And we do that with intense thought leadership and 3 strategic pillars, being workplace, roadway, and our team, the impairment team. Really, our team has the opportunity to influence and build programs and projects to make an impact for workers in the workplace and families on the roadway. That's what led us ultimately to this project, and I know that you all are much more familiar about this than I am, but we have the opportunity at National Safety Council to address cannabis product testing requirements or the lack thereof. And because there isn't the FDA regulation that is needed, we have some inconsistencies in product testing and identification of substances and cannabinoid products, which can lead to consumers being unwillingly impaired or harmed, and really at risk for a lot of consequences. So the goal of this project is really to create a resource to review state cannabis testing regulations and really develop a resource guide for policymakers and others to weigh in on the need for federal and state oversight. As you know, the legalization of cannabis without federal oversight is a problem. And this resource, we really hopefully will lead to raising awareness of those gaps and enabling all of us to work together for the safety of cannabis products. At National Safety Council, we don't take a position for or against the legalization of cannabis. We are for safety. And what we know about cannabis legalization is that it has led to some unintended consequences. Overdose deaths are continuing to rise in the workplace and any place. Overdose deaths, impaired driving, and substance misuse continue to be some of the major concerns that have come out of cannabis legalization. We're working on all of these problems to really raise awareness, develop programs, and provide impact to preventing unintentional injuries. So really the bulk of this project is gathering the testing requirements from US states and territories, and really looking to develop a summary and overview of the health and safety data that can be derived from the regulations. So the task at hand, we're currently compiling those ever-changing state regulations and guidance as it relates to laboratory testing of cannabis. And really, this report should help to identify the gaps that we all know exist and the limitations of labs and other producers, as well as some strengths that we have learned from states who have been at the cannabis regulation for a while. And really one of the challenges of this project that we have found is preventing the scope to be too large, because we only have about 16 to 18 months to complete and compile the research. And if we sought together all of the information about all the possible contaminants, for example, we could go on for a really long time. So we've sought to limit these to some of the most harmful for human consumption. And you'll see we hope to include the specific analytical methodologies related to the analysis that you all are very familiar with. As you know, we're kind of in a cart before the horse situation, as Dr. Susan Adino, who is our principal investigator, likes to say. Unfortunately, the regulations that we're seeing across the states were not led by empirical evidence. And so we're hoping that this project will start to contribute to gathering some of that evidence or the need for it, and work together with you all on all of the meaningful research that you're doing around cannabis as well. One of the project deliverables in this project is to develop a web tool that will be accessible to audiences in the public, regulators, public health entities, where they can gain information about the gaps in cannabis testing and regulation oversight. There's no comprehensive tool that we're aware of that provides this information in one place. And we think that this is needed, and National Safety Council is in a position to be able to provide this. Because it will be a comprehensive tool, this tool can also help policymakers strengthen their current testing programs and increase oversight where needed. On the screen is an example of a web tool that we developed for COVID, and we foresee that this project will will put forth something very similar. We are hopeful that this data will also be a source for researchers looking to investigate marijuana testing policies and requirements across the country. We're really working right now to determine what is that top level information that policymakers and those of us who are not scientists are looking for, and then also have available to you all who are doing the research, the scientific research, to be able to find the detailed data information and points that you're needing. So this is a foundational tool for us. And because this addresses research and consumer safety, it really fits into the strategy at National Safety Council. It's not going to be employer specific, but we hope to create awareness materials and continue to expand on this information while pointing them to this tool. Potentially, we'd like to expand the project and create some materials for employers and employees to really build on cannabis policies as it relates to the workplace and how to keep workers and families safe. So another part of the deliverables that we're looking to see in this project is a white paper that will really discuss the challenges and the overview of the current regulatory situation and opportunities that we have to make it better. We are looking at cannabis laboratory testing and the industry as of current. What's out there, what are laboratories doing, what are states requiring of their laboratories, what kind of technology are they utilizing, how can they share information, and really the quantitative results of this research will hopefully point to a optimal testing process. So we know that that's not currently happening in labs across the country. And so it really is hopefully going to be a call for action for the public and for regulators, for public health advisors, and of course, scientists like you all to be able to point to the gaps and come up with some solutions on how we can safely regulate this industry. So I talked a little bit about the web tool and what the goals are around that deliverable. We have also assembled a scientific advisory board to help us really guide this project. And of course, we have our principal investigator, Dr. Susan Idino, who is our analytical chemist. And we have a marijuana policy analyst, some program evaluators from National Safety Council, some toxicologists, a behavioral medicine physician, an addiction clinician, a microbiologist, some cannabis industry representatives, and of course some public health professionals. The goal with this advisory board is really to help guide the research to be comprehensive and technically correct. We know that there are a lot of individual goals that these board members have, but collectively we are really coming together to be able to collect the data in a way that is most meaningful for everyone and come up with some solutions, hopefully, as we get through the project. Right now, we're getting ready to start tracking the regulations, which is a feat in itself. State cannabis regulations are changing very fast, and the industry is exploding. And so that is one of the tasks that I have at the National Safety Council, is really to track those changes and work together with other groups who are working similarly on tracking. Very much appreciate the Aoac and the Casp group on collaboration and the opportunity to share information. We are also sharing information with CANRA, which is the Cannabis Regulators Association. They, like you all, have some work groups very specific to cannabis testing and products. So I know that together we really have the opportunity to share information and work towards those solutions. Like I said, this project is about a 16 to 18 month project, and we're right in the thick of it, and getting ready to kick off the data collection and the data analysis. We have been working behind the scenes with a third-party web developer to be able to develop a web tool that we can both collect the data and then later visualize the data in a meaningful way. We have a research team here at National Safety Council who will be working on some of the data conversion items and the web tool integration. Obviously, the technical writing and the report creation comes later. So we're really looking to launch the results of this product about this time next year. So again, I am really thrilled to be a part of, or what I like to call an observer of the AOAC working groups. As a non-scientist, I don't have a lot to share, but certainly National Safety Council is dedicated to sharing sharing resources on regulations and guidance so we can really lead to a better understanding for all of us. We welcome the opportunity for collaboration in sharing of resources, really to move the needle on putting the science in front of the regulation for the health and safety of everyone. This project is probably one of the first of its kind that we know of that's bringing together thought leaders from industry, from regulation, and from science to have that very important dialogue. And we look forward to providing a resource for you all and the public and policymakers to make really evidence-based decisions as it relates to cannabis and safety. I'm looking forward to seeing all the work that you all are doing in the working groups, and I appreciate everyone's dedication to making cannabis products safe and regulated the best as possible. I am sharing my contact information with all of you. Please feel free to reach out and contact me with any information or just to share resources. Like I said, our impairment practice area at National Safety Council is really dedicated to building awareness and finding solutions for safety problems. And we know that the legalization of cannabis is contributing to some of those things. And our goal is, again, to help everyone live their best and most fulfilled life at work, on the road, and anywhere else. So thank you very much to Christopher and the group for the opportunity to share information with you today. And I am going to be available for questions shortly. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you so much, Katie. Do we have any questions for Katie? She is with us on Zoom. Nothing online? Okay, well, if you think of any, please, again, feel free to shoot them over to me by email, and I can always touch base with Katie, get back to you after. So thank you so much, Katie, for your presentation today. Appreciate it. So next on the agenda. So far, today's meeting, let me take this off so you can hear me. So far, today's CASP meeting has followed the pretty typical CASP meeting agenda. We've had our working group, we had our program overview, our working group updates, and our guest speaker, all of which have been wonderful so far. And now we're going to do something a little bit different and new for CASP. The advisory panel, last couple of meetings, they've kind of expressed their desire to hear a little bit more from the community about what you all want to see CASP working on next. So what we're going to do is have a little bit of a panel discussion. For that, I'd like to invite Scott Coates up here and Susan, who are going to, well, Susan's already up here, to co-moderate the panel. And the panel is going to consist of a few advisory panel members. Mike Lowenstein, do we have you here? Come on up, Mike, if you don't mind. And then our other panelists are with us virtually. Sally Powell-Price from Millipore Sigma and Seth Wong from Tech Analytical. Nick, is there any way we can like spotlight those two? Okay. And honestly, if there are any other advisory panel members here that want to participate, just feel free to come up. If you want to walk around, that's fine too, whatever you prefer.
I'm just going to work from here.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. And I am going to go.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So I will be moderating our discussion with the advisory panel. And as Chris said, we're looking for feedback from the group here. And Chris, if you could do two things maybe. I think we'll probably will want to have a list that we can put up if that's possible. I'm sorry to interrupt your.
Nope.
And secondly, on that list, if you could give us a starter bite of the things that we're working on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I know we're working on proficiency testing, and we wanted to identify what things need to be done in proficiency testing. Brent has specifically asked for some feedback and input from this group. And then with the training and education, Toby Astill had also specifically asked for some feedback from this group with regard to regionality, other areas of the world where we might consider putting training sessions together. Microbiology group seems to be pretty well set. They're working on the guideline. And hopefully we'll have something to take a look at in March, mid-year meeting 2022. But I'm sure that they would also appreciate input. Then the product-centric seems to have their work cut out for them. And what else did we have that needs to be mentioned?
Pretty much got it. At the last AP meeting, it was agreed that the product-centric working group should continue to work with beverages, and then a couple future topics were also recommended. Hemp oil and cosmetics could follow. But we want to talk about all of that. We want to see what the community feels about those topics and where the community would like to take the micro working group next, because once they have their guidelines completed, we don't have anything else lined up for them. And also, as Scott said, proficiency testing, they've been working to advise the Aoac PT program, but Brent is still on the line with us, and he has some other ideas that he's spoken to Susan and I about that I think they'll raise as well. That might be a good place to start.
I think so with Brent.
What?
With the proficiency
Yeah,
testing.
Brent and Susan have discussed some ideas for where to take that group once they've kind of completed their current mission.
Okay. Brent, are you still on the line?
Yes, I am, Scott.
Okay. So Brent, could you elucidate a little bit more what kind of input that you were looking for from the group?
So my idea is we're providing a lot of specific information to the PT program, but there's much more that's unknown, and people don't necessarily have the knowledge about what a PT program, what does it mean when you participate in it, what does the results mean when you get it. And one of the big things that me and Susan were talking about is maybe coming up with some type of like a guidance document that could provide a lot of the basic information summarizing up with the definitions that a lot of these labs don't have knowledge about when they're starting the testing, or if a product manufacturer is trying to, they develop a new product and they just send it out from a lab and they want to know what this lab is doing in the way of PT testing in that area. There's a lot of unknown or variables where you have a lot of scientists that aren't, people who aren't scientists that don't really are getting into this field and trying to really just provide some type of specific knowledge for them. And that was kind of the main idea that we had, but there's also other aspects of proficiency testing and other requirements that laboratories have to fulfill on a yearly basis or to show confidence to their consumers. And it's just a question of, is there something else that the group could be tackling to try and provide more guidance to the community, the CASP community as a whole?
Any comments or feedback on that? And if you do, if you could use the mic in the middle of the room. And yeah.
I have to hold the button. It's gonna make me work.
Just to add to what Brent said, is the guidance document that I think he is referring to is to help the laboratories understand the differences between and among things like proficiency testing, ILCs or interlaboratory comparison studies, intra-laboratory comparison studies, what is proficiency testing, and how is competence determined either as an individual lab or among other labs, so that this guidance document would cover kind of all of that, and then also provide avenues for the current commercial products that are available for each of those categories, and as examples or perhaps even as a directory to get started with. And it would also supplement the work that the AOAC proficiency test program is currently developing and evolving.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, based on what you said, that maybe this is also a crossover to the training and education, both the document and a training element to that.
I think that that is very likely going to be the case. I think that we use the word proficiency testing kind of interchangeably with all of these other terms, and the nomenclature is pretty clear, but you have to go down very deep rabbit holes in the world of regulation to truly understand the differences and the nuances of each of them. And they're not readily available to especially new laboratories in a nascent industry. And so what we're proposing is to bring to the forefront the more practical and useful definitions of what these programs are, where they exist, how they exist, and how they might be accessed and accessible for the cannabis and hemp testing laboratories.
Could you use the mic, please?
Hi, I'm Tracy. I'm one of the accreditors for the cannabis laboratories from Perry Johnson. And just one of the things I'm listening to is just that some of the labs don't understand, or I think that's what Walter was saying, that they didn't understand what PT was. That surprises me, being a 17025 accreditor for the lab, so they don't understand what they're getting into, because a lot of them have to do that as far as being accredited. So it'll be good, I guess, if they're not understanding what they're getting into, to add that to the guidance. But one other thing too is that from an accreditation standpoint, what we get a lot of times is in our policy, we might have a lesser requirement, but to maybe put something in there as a recommended practice, especially that there's not validated methods completely finished yet, for them to know that PTs are a good way for them to validate their methods. They should be doing them more than once per year. I know that the Aoac document is out there for the food and pharmaceutical, under AOAC. Some states use that as part of their program, but to maybe add something like that in there too, recommended frequencies to do PTs as well.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. Great comments. I I think that the laboratories do understand what PT is, particularly those that are 17025 accredited, but PT has different meanings too. So there's PT, there's accredited PT, right? 17043 programs. How is that different from an interlaboratory comparison study? So I think I apologize for being kind of perhaps not very descriptive or very explicit in my description, but I think that the many laboratories are kind of grouping all of these different types of proficiency and competency together as PT, when in fact they may not all be PT. Yes, those that are accredited have to subscribe to and must meet the requirements for PT, proficiency testing. But there's also a lot of other programs out there that may not meet the need for proficiency testing pursuant to ISO 17025. And all we're proposing is not to challenge anything, but just to elucidate and make a little bit clearer what all of the different types of programs are for a laboratory to develop its own skill set and then compare it amongst others.
So am I hearing like we need like a primer document, a little more basic, or?
Just a guidance document, I think, is what Brent was referring to, and I think that that sounds reasonable, and to supplement that through the training and education.
Okay. Do we have any comments?
Yeah, Sally and I have our hand
Sally,
up in the
please.
Zoom.
You can go ahead, Seth, if you want. I can comment after.
No, go for it.
I was just adding to that is if there's any guidance, I know cannabis not necessarily tested in public health labs, but public health labs have a very strong affiliation with, the federal bodies like FDA and CDC. So if we're looking at this in the kind of long-term context for how this wants to be built and how you want to have proficiency testing defined, that might be a thought in the states where this is legal, to have those discussions and model it after that kind of proficiency testing for like food safety testing, Legionella testing. That's just one idea, but I came from the public health lab space, and I know we used to work very closely in that realm. And so at the point that this is federally legalized, that might be something that could then be adapted into a larger framework.
To elaborate on the guidance document, I think we certainly need to round that out. We need to provide more information as to everything from how to calculate a Z-score and what that is, because I think, unfortunately, we are seeing a lot of labs that get a badge, if you will, at the completion of a PT and essentially an approval, right? And they may not understand where they played out in the field and what that meant and how far from the mean they actually were and what the rest of the distribution looked like. So I think we have a big lift as far as the educational components concerned, so that people understand that the appropriate implementation and application of each type of PT, if we're going to articulate those further to Susan's point, because just because you're an ISO lab, we've met a number of people who don't recognize that they need to have a PT or what that even means and the frequency at which they need to submit, like Tracy mentioned. And that's a real scary thought, because how are you getting ISO 17025 accredited if you don't understand those requirements? So I think there's a lot of red flags here that we can address from an educational component.
Yes, and I'm still thinking the educational part. We didn't talk about it this morning or earlier today about, we do have some training courses that Aoac has put together. And I am thinking that maybe this would be both a guidance document and a training course that we could put together. And that kind of it could either go through Toby's group or it could go through the Aoac. We have a group of technical consultants that have been putting together training courses, and we could do something for proficiency testing for cannabis labs.
And perhaps Brent may want to chime in on this as well. I believe part of the discussion included a bit of a survey of the products that are already available to the cannabis labs, and to help identify what we already have covered and what we still need, or what the industry has available and what the industry still needs. keeping in mind that we have several products that are already available by way of ISO 17043 and some that are not. And it may be helpful to provide that survey to stakeholders, the CASP stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that would be just like pull together what materials are available and make that
Scott,
part of it.
Scott, so this is Brent. So Susan's absolutely correct. And kind of what I was thinking was it could kind of go into, if you think about the direction that AOAC is taking in a product-centric mode, there's not a lot available out there in proficiency testing when you get in some of these product-centric and aspects of it, categories, and just making them aware of what is available. And it also kind of would point out to the PT community, I mean the providers, hey, maybe I need to start thinking about offering stuff in this category instead of limiting it to oils or extracts or hemp. I mean, just or the plant material. Just expand it into beverages. I mean, look at the working group that Holly and I was talking about earlier, along with Julie, where they're focusing a lot on beverages. I mean, so trying to think of it as that way as well with the survey, looking at all the different options to what are available and what need to be available in the future.
Yep, sounds good. Any other comments in the room here? Brent, did you need any additional feedback?
No, I think it's fine. I got some good information. What I would suggest is, because a lot of people might not necessarily had a lot of time to think about it, feel free. My email is walter.wilson@nest.gov. Feel free to email me or Susan if you think of something a couple days later or something that you feel like that maybe you would like us to consider trying when we're doing this. And just the door's not shut on providing feedback, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Sally, I saw you had a comment, but it popped up and popped off real fast, and wonder if you could just go ahead and speak to your comment.
Sure. Sorry, I was just saying as kind of an added tip, and I know that AOAC collaborates really well with these groups, but involving groups like AFDO, the Association of Food and Drug Officials, and CANRA on some of these discussions, as I know that they both had discussions on PT, might be a good place to also start and have that feedback as well, if that's not already taking place.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I guess it speaks to the question, though, is an effort like this, would this be value added to this community, is my question.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think it definitely would be from my perspective. I know that when you work in the with state regulators, I mean, they're always looking for frameworks that can be more broadly discussed. So anything that could be created to make their lives easier or the local municipalities easier and have a streamlined approach to this, I can only see that adding value.
Susan, I also think it'd be helpful from an audit standpoint. Let's say your ISO 17025 auditor does come in, realize your PT is not compliant or applied appropriately, and then you're able to provide them a reference document to say, here's how you can correct your deficiency and let's talk through this. I mean, that seems to be the strongest win, and then that goes into the library as an external document. That seems exceptionally valuable. Having been on, a number of deficiencies in any lab audit, as a good audit should find.
Those dang auditors, I'll tell you.
I'd wonder what we're getting or what we're paying for if we didn't have deficiencies,
How about value for the laboratories? So I understand the value for the regulator, and I understand for meeting requirements. Sorry about that. What about for the laboratories? Do you think that the folks actually who have to implement these proficiency tests, do you think this would add value for them?
Okay. Any further discussion on proficiency testing?
Night is more important for me. I know, but at night you have 69. Now you have blankets and
Is
you
that what
know.
it said, 69? I don't know.
I didn't get that.
I think it was just an unmuted mic.
Oh, okay. All right, let's move on and let's tackle microbiology. So currently, the microbiology working group is working on the different sets of the guidelines, and I'm impressed. I'm impressed with the scope that they've agreed to take on and progress that they've made. They're hoping to have something to present to the Casp group in mid-March next year in 2022. And they're looking down the road for the second half of 2022 and like to get input from Casp about what could be their next projects.
Hello, Anthony Ripe here, Laboratory Director of RSR Analytical in Las Vegas, Nevada, a cannabis compliance laboratory. The next step I really think we should be focusing on is the beverages. In one thing that in my prior experience in food and environmental microbiology was membrane filtration. Seeing as though there's not really a pedestal to stand on right now, I know a lot of laboratories, exclusively in Nevada, where quantification needs to be done on a plate level. People are just plating 1 mil of the target substance and quantifying via that. I know it's going to take a lot of work with the state auditors as well, because it kind of falls into an edible matrix as well, which is categorized by Nevada as one CFU per gram. So I know things would have to change and a lot of hands would have to be shaken for that to take place. But I think that'd be a great avenue to go down in the future. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, and it fits right in with what we're trying to do with the other group with the chemical contaminants, and it makes sense to apply the same kind of thinking on the microbiology side. I'm just wondering, Julie, if you could speak to that, what you think?
Just to make sure I understand your suggestion. So in terms of focusing on beverages and specifically the methods by which they're being tested, I know you referenced a method where people are plating 1 milliliter of sample. Were you referring to enriched sample or certain analytes with that? Or was that just a general concern?
So in the state of Nevada, I guess the beverage falls under edible. And so the only thing that you really have to test for via plating is the enterobacteria or APC.
Right.
And so it was just a thought process that I think that it might just be a small amount of sample that's being used to quantify this whole lot. So in theory, you're only testing 2 mils. And then of course Salmonella and E. coli, but exclusively for the quantifications, it needs to be done on a plate in the state of Nevada.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment. And thank you for clarifying a bit further. That helped me understand. So I think some of that will hopefully be addressed in the validation guidance document that's coming up. When I was discussing the subgroup that's looking at the suitability of testing media, just what you're bringing up would fall in line with some of their guidance that they'll come forward with. So one concern I would have beyond just the low sampling confidence in just 1 mil of a beverage out of an entire bottle from an entire lot of bottles, right, would also be that there are definitely potentially inhibitory effects from the beverage on its own. And so that's why they started going down a kind of matrix of sorts of looking at, okay, if you have this type of product with these types of physical or chemical characteristics, do you need to dilute it to decrease inhibitory effects? And so you can create a study where you would spike in an analyte of interest into the beverage itself and then spike in an analyte of interest and then dilute it or neutralize it in a different way and go through this testing protocol to see if you are having inhibition of your analytes of interest. So I think, again, to your point, that could be addressed in that way. and then also going through and looking at test portion requirements. So I know that SMPRs obviously don't dictate regulations, but so far in the microbial SMPRs, different matrix categories have different sample amounts that are required as a test portion. So right now, infused edibles are required to use 25-gram test portions. So in this case, it would require that beverages are tested at a 25-gram amount, which would equate to approximately 25 mils, which would be more representative, although depending on the lot of beverage, that could still not be that much, right? But I think it's a start. And so hopefully in the matrix categorizations section of the validation guidance, that may go into some further detail on that. So I hope, again, that can address some of those concerns, but was there anything else you think would be relevant to maybe include in SMPR? Sounds like to integrate regulation or regulators into that conversation?
No, that was great. Yeah, the only thing is it would just, I think someone alluded to it prior to this in the discussion about how things are categorized in different matrix types. And so this would almost be a completely different matrix type because you would be quantifying by liter instead of gram.
Right.
So it's just something to think about.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I'll actually write that down to bring to the subgroup to also consider.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
I know we have a comment from the chat, but Nora, I don't think the people in the back of the room can hear you because you don't have a mic over there. So if you could.
This one was just to say that Drew Linnell has his hand up.
Oh, okay. Well, all right, Drew has his hand up and you have a comment, Drew, and then we'll take Deanne.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Just for some sort of couple thoughts I had on sort of future goals for the micro subgroup or group would be, and actually, Scott, this might be one that's more even directed to you, is that actually I had remember a long time ago, I had a conversation with Pat Bird about, and he was thinking that at some point, seeing listeria being included with this, especially, with now food manufacturers turning to make edibles, that the listeria environmentals become a risk for edible products. And so I say that, with now you starting to do these TME, you may want to consider doing listeria in either edible products or environmental surfaces as a TME, because I think that may become, there's nobody who has listeria right now for cannabis, and I'm saying, especially there, that's where it might be entering into the, where people really would be testing for it. And so just a suggestion, you might, I think you've done surfaces before as a TME, and that may be, for listeria, may be a good one there for cannabis surfaces. And then the other thing, just sort of, and it's not, I just consider it more of a, I'll just call it a black box, which is that, I saw that, when you look at the different categories, right now there's been mostly the focus on the cannabis plants and flowers, and, we've, we just talked about beverages and edibles, but what I was going to say is that, like, when I think of the concentrates, to me, when I think of microbiology dealing with these concentrates like oils and distillates and things like that, to me, they just, create their own problems above and beyond, like for testing. And I don't know if I was just, does anyone have any standards for testing that? Now, I know you're not developing, and a lot of times this gets into a method developer and how they work around for their product to work, but nonetheless, I still think that it may not be a bad idea to look at if you can maybe expand a little bit more on, parameters for testing these, when you get into these, like that concentrates, oils, where, it's going to be a low volume, but, you're going to have to probably dilute it pretty far to get it to where it won't be inhibitory, things like that. So something to sort of more consider when looking at the standards. Is there anything more guidance and or standards on those type of really difficult matrices?
Okay, good point. Julia, do you have any comment on that?
Again, an interesting point was raised there. I don't think I quite heard what type of concentrate you were referencing. I heard it as live dead studies as concentrate. Is that what you're saying?
No, well, I just know that there's sorry. I'm not an expert on this field, but I just know that there's a lot, with cannabis, there's a lot of these sort of concentrates or cannabis oils and cannabis, these things that are very, very concentrated. And if you were to try to test them probably at first, if you try testing at 1 to 10, the volume will be so small, but above and beyond that, if you tried enriching that as for micro, it's probably too inhibitory for anything to happen, just that product itself. And so my point here was sort of thinking about guidance of like what volumes are expected for testing from, from method developers and things like that, because, having a little more of that guidance might also push method developers to actually try including it if they have, where it's not like they feel like they have to do so much just upfront development on just like, what is it? How does it work? But if there's some more limiting ways that you can sort of describe it, I think that might allow AOAC and these SNPRs to sort of expand on getting people to actually, develop methods for it.
Yeah, I think points well taken there. So with regard to the total sample volume, I definitely think that's a concern because obviously if, let's say, you take 1 gram of concentrate and then dilute that 1 to 10, so you've theoretically then 10 total mils or that's your total volume within your sample, and then you have to go through a series of analyses using 1 mil of that sample, and let's say then you have to confirm. Well, oftentimes you won't get a full 10 mils of solution if you assume that the concentrate was fully homogenized, which also often doesn't happen with these extremely sticky hydrophobic concentrates. And so you could run into a situation where you're not getting a representative sample or enrichment. So again, I think that's something that would really benefit from having an extensive suitability of testing media study conducted on it to really see first how we can try to homogenize concentrates into solution to then have a sample that's really representative and also not inherently inhibitory. So I'll mark that down as well as a focal point for one of the subgroups. And I know you've mentioned Pat Bird. I know he's specifically, oh wait, I think he's in the deconomatrix subgroup, never mind. But I'm sure he would give some advice if we reached out to him as well from what they've seen. I know I've seen some studies where surfactants like polysorbate 80 are used to try to bring those concentrates into solution. But again, you have to then ensure that not too large a concentration of polysorbate is in a solution to the extent that it would inhibit your analytes of interest. So definitely very valid concerns there, and hopefully we'll have some guidance, and then from the guidance, some studies to address that.
Or, yeah, thank you. I really like those ideas. What I was just going to say, you might also just see, and you may be able to put like, it's just even like references on literature. Has anyone done for like BPW or Fraser broth or anything, like those common enrichment medias that are typically used for our microbiological studies? Have people try doing any of these concentrates in them, and what did they do to make them, as you say, homogenize? I think those would be good starting points to help as in sort of reference as people look at your standards.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. I know we've referenced some of the USP guidance on testing cosmetics previously because they have some similar challenges with inherently hydrophobic sample types. So perhaps we can also add that in to guide people in that development.
Sue, I'm going to get back around to your question about, I think you asked for Listeria TME. I'll get back around to it, but Deanne Benesh has been standing patiently at the microphone, and let her ask her question, and I'll get back around to your question, your first question.
And it's so boring compared to what Andrew just went through, so I apologize. I'm going backwards, actually, to the beverage part, because I'm wondering why, since beverages are regulated by FDA as a food, why wouldn't we just use the bottled water, 100 mils filtering for plating for intravector ACA, et cetera, instead of making up a whole new thing?
So was that a suggested, oh, excuse me, that was very loud, a suggested method for analyzing water samples? So the actual sampling protocol where you take 100 mils and filter and test from the filtrate?
You plate the filter because you're counting.
Right. I think that could be a good starting point, but when you're getting into more complex beverage matrices like carbonated beverages or very acidic beverages, then you might still encounter some inhibitory effects that have to be addressed. But to your point, that could be a good method to look to for at least the initial sample preparation. Yep.
Great. Drew, did I understand your first comment was about putting together a TME for Listeria?
Yeah, more of my comment was more dealing with edibles, in that the TMEs that have been done so far have been with flour, with flour and plants.
Got it.
And what I was saying is that this would be a different way of doing a TME, and I was suggesting with Listeria, that's more likely going to be involving edibles and environmental samples. And so I was saying that if giving you another opportunity to do a TME would be looking at, and again, probably more even there, the environmental samples, but I guess one is there any difference in the environmental surfaces of a cannabis edibles production plant versus a regular one? My guess is there probably is, but I'm not sure what it is. So my point was then creating sort of a surface like that to use for your TME to sort of mimic the challenges of a cannabis production facility for food. Again, there's a lot of unknowns I have there, but point is that may be very valuable for people having that for a TME for Listeria.
Okay, so that's actually homework for me, not necessarily for the CASP panel. But yeah, I think what we can do is we could work with you and some of the other members of CASP and see what matrices would be, what pathogens and other than what we've worked on, and what matrices that we haven't worked on that would be of interest. But that's something that I'll have to work on and report back to this group since it came from here. But great feedback. Thank you, Drew.
Yeah, I was just going to say one final thing on that would be just, you were talking about what the micro group would do next is sort of look at just more in general for edibles, what are the target organisms and foods there a little bit more in detail, because as I said, really most of the CASP has been focusing, for micro has been focusing on the plants, and I think to give more emphasis to the other areas would be very helpful.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Good comment. We have another question out here on the floor.
Hi, everyone. Pat Bird. Mine is a completely different topic, but it's borrowing from what we heard earlier today from Holly Johnson and her group. Really like to see a comprehensive list of microbial contaminants requirements by states, something that could be organized that method developers, laboratories that are in different states, regulators can see what's out there. If you Google it, you'll find about 15 different maps, and who knows which ones are actually accurate, and it's changing constantly. But having something that would be a reference for people to understand what the states are testing by matrix, the requirements, test portion sizes, I think would be really beneficial to labs.
Okay. Any more comment from the chat box? Anybody online? Anybody in the room on microbiology? Good comments. Oh, Sally.
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to say to Pat and the wider group that AFTO is currently, they have a cannabis working group that's working on that specific problem. So I'm happy to connect to you if you're not already connected with them. And they're also tied in with CANRA as well. And so they're working on a research consolidated database that has all of that information.
All right. Good info.
Hey, Scott, just to put it on the list while we're talking about micro so we can canonize it somewhere, I think anaerobic bacteria in concentrates is a huge one that needs to get toppled at some point in time, because I think proposed methods or methods that are employed right now, loosely using all of those terms, is very open-ended, and we don't know what we don't know, much like the Listeria problem.
Yep. Got that?
Yep.
Okay, good. Any more on micro? What was next on our list, Chris?
Well, next to be product centric, and at the last AP meeting, it was actually Sally proposed a couple of future topics for them, hemp seed oil and also cosmetics. So I was actually going to ask Sally if you wouldn't mind expanding on that a little bit and what exactly you guys see the product centric working group doing with those topics.
Sure, Chris. Thank you. So at the last working group when we discussed this, and we proposed Mil per Sigma with collaborators in China, actually, the Chinese National Institute of Standards proposed an SMPR on looking quantitation of cannabinoids in hemp seed oil and cosmetics. So in the hemp seed oil space, it's one of a lot of interest, and I've seen that gaining traction in some of the research literature as well. Just looking at the fact that the safety profile for hemp seed oil on the surface is THC free and cannabinoid free. You don't need to worry about safety profiles on a superficial level, but as we know in our space that's not true. So manufacturing and the variety of hemp used to create the hemp seed oil, seed contamination, seed washing procedures, things like that can lead to large amounts of cannabinoids. And we're seeing over 10 ppm in some sampling of commercial final product of hemp seed oil of THC. So there's a safety concern there for consumers and a safety concern there and a compliance concern there. So when we're looking at analytical methods, just the quantitation for those cannabinoids, targeting things that may be of safety concern, that's something we think might be of value to AOAC, but that also falls into looking at that matrices, right? Those oil matrices that might extend to other products. So while it's not strictly cannabis on a superficial level, looking at the safety profile it is. So that's where we're coming from. I'd definitely be interested in hearing the interest of this to others. I know from our standpoint, it's a global interest. We have a lot of stakeholders in Europe and China that this is very relevant for, but certainly would love to hear input on that.
And Holly, I think, had some questions or follow up on that.
Yeah, just perhaps a quick comment. This is such a great opportunity to interact with the advisory panel and really appreciate those comments. I think hemp seed oil, recently I've gotten some inquiries about this, and there's almost zero standards internationally for hemp seed oil. And this is one of the things that's been actually approved in terms of a no objection letter from the FDA. So this is something that a lot of our stakeholders are marketing. And when we think about seed oils, we think about things like fatty acid composition and, other things we use for like olive oil, flaxseed oil, those types of things. And so I actually think this is a great direction for this group to go in. And of course, I might be involved in the work going forward. But so hemp seed oil, I think, is a great, and I love to hear this coming from the advisory panel. At first, I was like, wait, what? But no, this is really, it's clear that there are not standards. We're actually lacking standards for the thing that is actually approved by the United States, FDA, or not approved, but has had a no objections letter through GRAS notification. So I think that's really important. The other thing I want to mention is, you guys have on your list cosmetics. And I find this like a little bit strange. And again, I just maybe wanted to ask the panel, this is a chance to ask the panel, why cosmetics? Are there a lot of, or I guess cosmetics is the wrong word, it's personal care products, right? And so topicals, and initially the FDA had put out in their initial, kind of Q&A about this, or the FAQ, I guess, not a Q&A, had said they had no objection to personal care products and having CBD in them. That's now changed. So I understand that that's maybe where this comes from, but I feel like, what about dietary supplements? Like that's actually way more prevalent in the markets. And so again, I just want to kind of throw that back to maybe the advisory panel for discussion is like, at first I thought those two things were a bit obscure. I now am very much in favor of the hemp seed oil project. But just wondering about cosmetics versus something like dietary supplements, which seems to have like a pretty major marketplace. And again, most of the personal care products, you can only have them, again, I don't want to, go into the regulatory language, but to beautify or this and that. There's no claims possible unless they become OTC, right? So anyway, just wanted to toss that to the advisory panel about like, what about supplements? And I guess also I'm totally biased.
Thank you, Holly. I'd just like to quickly respond to the cosmetic piece. Absolutely, it makes complete sense. Where we're coming from is this was also proposed in collaboration with our China group, so Chinese National Institute of Standards. So from the international perspective, there are different regulations and different regulatory needs around and testing needs around personal care products that might not be as relevant for North America, or maybe not as, I shouldn't say as relevant, but aren't as high profile. But because we're coming from this global piece where we have stakeholders all over the world and in dozens of countries, that was something that kind of merged all of their needs together as something, an AOAC looking to expand globally, be more international, be more relevant in that way. That was where we were coming from, but certainly, you know, dietary supplements, I completely agree with you. I think that's a really, really hot space.
Great for that feedback. Yes.
It's online. That's a question.
Okay.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this is Steve Gendel from the FCC. I just want to comment on the fact that the Food Chemicals Codex has proposed standards both for hemp seed oil and hemp seed protein that are currently open for comment in the FCC forum. So we will shortly, in a matter of a few months, actually have standards for those products which are out there. But certainly you can look at the proposed standards as a start on that. So it's not quite as bleak as was just commented. And my colleague Kenny Z just put the link to it in the chat so that you can go to the FCC forum and see it.
Steve, I saw a number of heads that were nodding yes to your comment. So I think some of the group members are aware of that development, and certainly we will work with USP. What else what other topics do we have? We're getting close to 5 o'clock, and we actually only had scheduled for 30 minutes, but it was a great 45 minutes, very useful. What else did we have, Chris, that we need to cover?
I think that's it. I think we've got some great ideas to bring back to the AP, unless we've got anything else from the panelists. Okay.
I do have one thing I want to throw out to the community, kind of drop a little bomb, and we don't have to talk too much about it today, but I want people to be thinking about it, is because I've even heard it today, this confusion, I think, over terminology in this space, particularly when it comes to defining hemp versus marijuana, if we want to use that term, or cannabis, right? We all know what we mean when we say cannabis comprises both low and high THC cultivars, and some people will refer to those as hemp versus marijuana. But I think that there's still sufficient confusion even among our own community and certainly outside of this space. And it has come up as a point of discussion when voting on methods in the micro ERP group. And I'm sure it has as well in some of the other groups. I don't know to what extent, but I think that it would be good to let the different working groups and the community at large sort of argue over how we want to define these things, and then have AOAC publish something to that effect so that we can harmonize that language and avoid confusion, because I think there's going to be some methods that are coming up for approval that this will continue to be an argument over. Interested to hear if anybody else has a similar thought.
Thank you, Mike. Susan, did you have a comment that you wanted to make?
Susan and I have had many discussions about this.
Yeah, we've been talking about nomenclature for a while. It's still an outstanding need. But I have 2 comments or 2 suggestions for the AP, maybe a grab bag of stuff. One item came up a couple of times here, and that was around sampling. And there are two kinds of sampling that laboratories are encumbered by. One is field sampling and the other one is subsampling or aliquots, right, for laboratory testing. And I think that there is limited guidance available to laboratories for both of these, particularly in dealing with and handling complex matrices such as cannabis, high and low THC. And I'm wondering what feedback or how important the AP might consider some sort of work from CASP with respect to sampling in a statistically sound manner on both counts, both for aliquot sampling and field sampling. And then my second question, or thought, I should say, it's not even a question, but a thought for your consideration is, you know, and Tracy brought this up, that most of our labs here in cannabis are 17025 accredited, and we know that 17025 is the gold standard. Every laboratory should absolutely be 17025 accredited. However, it's made for all different kinds of laboratories, and there's a lot of ambiguity and a lot of risks that laboratories need to assume and evaluate on an ongoing basis. And we also know that a lot of laboratories don't do that. And Aoac somewhat mitigated that problem by creating their own set of expectations or sub requirements for food labs, right? And I wonder if going forward, if the AP would entertain the notion of creating sort of a CASP interpretation or expectation or additional requirements for cannabis labs that are 17025 accredited. Again, very, very similar to what Aoac has done for the food and feed industry.
Yeah, and this hemp cannabis question, I have a question that I want to pose to everybody here. What's come up a number of times is, can we use hemp when we say cannabis? Meaning not that they're the same or it's the same species, but meaning that rather than shipping cannabis with greater than 3.3%, can we use cannabis with less than 0.3% THC? Is that something that is important that we need to establish, that you could use either one?
Scott, it depends on what you mean by use, because we know that it doesn't always work out well on the analytics, or methods respond differently. So your use of use needs to be defined more clearly, but we should discuss that.
Yeah, I think to expand on Seth's point, right, for an analytical chemistry method, the cannabinoid profile and the potency of certain things, certain analytes, of course, is going to matter. The question then is, okay, for a micro method, does it matter that this has more THC or less THC or more of some other cannabinoid or the other? And it sounds like Julia has already spoken to this a little bit. There is some evidence that maybe there's some inhibitory effect of some cannabinoids or terpenes or other things. There's some literature that suggests maybe that's the case. And that's where this suitability testing is really going to be important, determining for the most common of those, how do we neutralize those, and in which case that seems to me that becomes less important as long as we're able to sufficiently neutralize those, which, you know, we can use them interchangeably.
Yep. All right, we're coming up on the hour. Open it up to anybody that's online.
I just want to see if you can let people know to check the chat, because there are some good documents and links seen in the chatter regarding these documents. Can you pull up the chat? Can you pull up the chat box?
I can do it.
Yeah. So there were some good links to documents that were in the chat box, and so we're pulling that up and also suggesting that you might want to go and take a look at that. And this will be saved, right?
Yeah, I've saved it,
This will
yeah.
be saved. Okay, anybody in the room, any last comment? Any of our working group or AP folks feel that we need any more feedback or any additional comments? All right, sounds like we're good for the day, right? All right, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Good meeting.
Thank you all. I think, as Scott said, that was a great meeting, and now we've got a lot we can bring back to the next AP meeting. So thank you to the panelists here and virtually. One last thing I want to let you guys know, there is a networking reception happening in the Commonwealth Room, which I believe is down the hall. So if you want to stop by for a beverage and do some networking, Commonwealth Room right now. Thank you all, and we'll be in touch soon.